o'clock?
Oh, Jay.
Thank you,
That's why we were
Tim.
yelling at you. Gotta move.
We have a quorum, Ernie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Laurie, could you turn the light on?
Yes.
All right, I'd like to call the Budget Review Committee to order. It's June 2nd, 2022. It's 7 o'clock, and we're in the Aldermatic Chamber and via Zoom, which the meeting link can be found on the agenda on the city's website. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alderman at Large Laurie Wilshire.
I am here.
Alderman John Sullivan.
Here.
Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly.
Here.
Alderman Ernest Jettie.
Here.
Alderman John Cathy is not present. Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien is present. And our chairman, Alderman Richard Dowd.
Present. Okay, the first item on the agenda is public comment for anything that appears on the agenda this evening. And that's just the divisions that are on the agenda.
Well, the speaker does come up, Mr. Chairman, if I may. For the record, also in attendance is John Griffin, CFO, Treasurer, Tax Collector for the City of Nashua, and may be in attendance Cheryl Linder, Treasury Management Officer.
And
And Alderman
Alderman Cathy.
Cathy is present.
Okay. Name and address for the record?
Okay, my name is Fred T-Boom, live at 24 Cheyenne Drive. I've sat in this budget committee for many years. You have to look at this budget committee as kind of a kabuki dance. You're being misdirected and misled about trivial things while the really important things are passing you by. Specifically the spending cap.
Excuse me, that's not on the agenda this evening. And you cannot
Specifically-
speak about it until the final public comment.
Specifically the spending cap. There has been no discussion about the spending cap in this budget
I just
committee.
told you, we're not talking about the
we've
spending cap
asked
on this
you-
meeting. If you keep speaking, I'm gonna have them escort you out. You can
have,
speak about it on the next public comment. The description of the spending cap is in the legislation, and this committee has absolutely no control over what the spending cap is. That's from administration.
well, let's talk about the city special revenue funds, which is part of your agenda.
All right?
And that makes up a significant portion of the calculation in the spending cap. These funds have never been part of the spending cap calculation. In fact, they've never been part of the annual budget. This is the first time in 25 years I've tracked that this special revenue funds have ever been discussed as part of the annual budget. The reason they're not part of the annual budget, these special revenues are called grants. These are grants, not a standard special revenue. These are grants. If you look at them, they're unspecified. Pending application for hydro, pending application. Nobody knows what that number is. 3.9 million, undetermined. Unanticipated public health care fund, $1 million, undetermined. Unanticipated transportation funds, $1 million, undetermined. CDBG money, 1.4 million. It's always been $700,000 in the last number of years. This is a gross misrepresentation. This is a lie. This is a deception. And you're going to look, if this doesn't change in the spending cap calculation and you don't change the resolution for the annual budget, Mr. Chairman, I've asked you this before, to get the spending cap calculation on the table or you're going to see you in court. Again. And this time we're going to have a high-priced attorney and the city's going to pay some really big bucks because it's negligence and deliberate fraud.
Anyone else for public comment?
Lori Ortolano, 41 Berkeley Street. In looking at the Finance Department budget, there's a couple things I want to note. I got those right-to-know requests that were filed to different departments, and the finance office had about 37 right-to-knows submitted to it since January. And I noticed this department isn't requesting a right-to-know paralegal. Ms. Kleiner's 10 departments had 55, and we're funding a right-to-know paralegal for an office. It looks to me like his office needs it a heck of a lot more than hers, but he had the common sense not to ask for that position because it's ridiculous. Secondly, I'd like to talk about the promotion of internal people. Ms. Linder moved into the treasurer management position at this office. We are constantly promoting from within, and we are constantly promoting from within people who are not necessarily competent or the right people. We did it with Ms. Kleiner out of assessing chief of staff. We did it with Sue Lovering. I objected last year. Sue Lovering's leaving. I said, we're gonna do all this training for 4 years to certify her, and she's gonna retire. In fact, she's retiring after 3 years. Why? Because her salary went up to about 110 grand for 3 years, and now she can draw a big retirement. We just moved another lady out as chief of staff, $72,000 position to a $110,000 position. Why? Because the mayor can call in all his favors, can set all his conformists up to hack the budget. We don't look for qualified people, and we have to do a better job at that. This promoting from within is killing the city, and the same thing happened with Ms. Kleiner. Chairman Dowd, I have a question for you. When will you be discussing the cap? Ernie Jetty asked for that. You said it would be put on the agenda at one of the budget meetings. When will that be discussed?
I was advised the cap determination is in the legislation. It's not under the control of this committee. It's determined by
1 minute.
administration, so.
The fact that you were advised and
if you
didn't
wanna
share it
bring
with your
up at
board.
if you want to bring it up at the public hearing on the budget, you may. 'cause
So,
everybody will be
Mr. Dowd, Alderman Dowd, you were asked about presenting this to the committee by a standing alderman. You said you would address it in a budget meeting. So is your answer today, that is not going to happen because it doesn't belong in a budget meeting? Is that your answer?
I just told you what my answer was.
Well, you didn't convey that to the people who asked in a public meeting. You did not convey that to Attorney Jetty in the public
This is
meeting.
public comment, not debate, so please.
It's
you've
not
got
debate.
20 seconds left.
Your policy says that questions can be asked and you can answer those questions if you so choose. You can also refuse. But I'm asking because I've sent you emails repeatedly and you've blown me off. And I don't appreciate it. I want to understand it, and if it's in the
Time.
city
Time's
special
up.
revenue fund, I want to understand it. How can you vote on it?
Madam, time, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a matter before the planning board, so I'm gonna run up there.
Sure.
They're taking it up now, and I'll come back as soon as I
All right.
can.
That's fine.
You're okay on a quorum?
Yeah, we're
right?
in quorum.
Yeah, thank you.
Communications,
There are none.
unfinished business,
There are none.
new business resolutions,
There are none.
new business ordinances,
There are none.
tabled in committee. Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion to remove from the table R-22-035, which stated relative to the adoption of the fiscal year 2023 proposed budget for the city of Nashua, general, enterprise, special revenue, and grant funds.
Okay, the motion is to remove from the table. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. R-22-035 is on the table. This evening, we will be covering Departments 118, Other General Government, 126, Financial Services, Capital Improvements, 81, Capital Equipment, 81 Capital Improvements. Other Public Safety is 159 and 162. Debt Service, Contingency and In-Fund Transfers, 193, 194, 198, 2508, 2510, and then various on the city special revenue funds funded by grants. First is Other General Government. Is there someone here to present the revenues on page 32, appropriations on 107? Please state your name and title for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, John Griffin, Treasurer, Tax Collector, and CFO, actually, and CFO, Treasurer, Tax Collector. If I may, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to address the committee and give kind of an overall
Sure.
status, plans for the Financial Services Division.
Okay.
So the Financial Services Division, Department number 126, ever since I arrived here, was always a kind of a single entity. You're not gonna see multiple department heads, things of that nature in there. So when I arrived, I became the CFO comptroller. So I was the chief accounting officer for the city, in addition to the Financial Services Director. So reporting to me at that time was the Treasurer, Tax Collector, David Fredette, Accounting Manager, Rose Evans, Finance Manager, Janet Graziano, Finance and Administrative Manager for the DPW, Carolyn O'Connor, and a number of other departments underneath there. So for the first 11 years of my tenure, I had the pleasure of working with a great team. I didn't hire any of them. I inherited them, and just a great team. And working with Treasurer Fredette and participating in bond rating calls, cash management seminars and procedures and all of that, I really gained a pretty good understanding of the Treasury function. I actually am a firm believer of promoting from within when possible. I've had the pleasure of hiring people, seeing them grow through their careers, and having them stay in touch with me and help me when I needed the help. As Alderman Sullivan queried Director Kleiner, the things that happen in government, you have a lean bench. You don't have multiple layers in city government, especially this city. So you have to be very careful in hiring people and go through that vetting process. As I mentioned, I inherited Dave Fredette, Carolyn O'Connor, Janet Graziano, and Rose Evans. We have been together, Carolyn, Janet, and Rose have been together with me since August of 2010. We've done great things. When Treasurer Fredette announced his retirement, I worked with the mayor, didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but it became apparent for a number of reasons that I'll get into and we can get into through the proceeding here, is that stability is a very important thing, especially in accounting, especially in finance, especially in a growing city like we have, where we have to go into the market for bonding annually to fund our projects. The first question we get when we go out to bond from our rating agencies is, who has left the organization? So with that in mind, and knowing that I had that solid team that I've worked with for a number of years, I knew we had a very excellent comptroller candidate in Rose Evans. I communicated that to the board and the internal staff. I knew we had a very competent, capable finance and administrative officer who reports to me, but really works hand in hand with Director Photo. That was a promotional opportunity. And I was looking for someone to help me from the treasury management side of the house. And we advertised, we got one candidate, who was Miss Linda, and I'm extremely impressed with her. We're kind of attached at the hip, if you see us around City Hall, et cetera. She wasn't able to make it tonight, but she has been attending the Finance Committee meetings for a reason. That reason is, as we know, most, if not all, of the purchases go through the Finance Committee. So what you have to do is you have to understand what the purchases are. You have to acknowledge how they were purchased through our procurement law, but also understand the budget impacts, the fiscal impacts, the cash management, et cetera. So, as I mentioned, I haven't had the ability, which I've had in prior jobs, to hire people. And I'm very proud to say that this hire is a good hire. And furthermore, to to address specifically Alderman Sullivan's question on succession planning. That's just what I did. Unfortunately, from an age standpoint, I'm running out of a little bit of time. I think I'm still on the back nine, but I might be heading towards the 19th hole. So I committed to the mayor and the city, and Miss Linda in particular, that I'm gonna be here for a while. I also committed to you folks when I went through my confirmation hearings, because I really like what we built here financially. I appreciate the fact that we have unmodified opinions on our financial statements. We have AAA ratings from Fitch and S&P. We were called, as I mentioned, one of the last times I was here. Moody's actually reached out to us to upgrade us to A, large A, small A1. And they did that because some of the things we've done have been quite impressive. We've purchased a utility water company in Pennachuck, and it's gone without a hitch. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the special revenue funds. But I also wanted to let some of the newer aldermen know that you folks are asking some great questions. You're asking about payroll and personnel and so forth. And I wanted to tell you that my reorganization of the Financial Services Division is still in transition. Don't have all the pieces and parts together, but we have key individuals at the CFO, Treasurer, Tax Collector, and the Comptroller. You're gonna see an accounting supervisor in there. That's because we need an accounting supervisor. Just as Director Kleiner said with her payroll department, her human resource department, and her benefits department, you need that succession planning. If you were maybe in corporate America and you had that, 1-1-1, might not work that great, or might be looked upon, frowned upon actually, but in this case, you need the capability for these individuals to step up when ready. And I've committed to my group that we're not gonna put anybody in a position to fail. We're gonna give them as much as we can with respect to training, but good training in the sense that spending a lot of time with the employees and going through some of the challenges we've had. So when you look at the fiscal 22 roster of employees and you look at fiscal 23, you know, what the heck's going on? But a lot of it is we've lost the treasurer tax collector. We've lost a senior financial analyst. We've decided not to hire a treasury analyst. Instead, get a treasury manager in Ms. Linder. And it's working out great so far. I think we're well-positioned to get through the budget process, well-positioned to, as we discussed on May 5th with the committee, sell the bonds competitively. We need to keep watching the market with our financial advisor, Hilltop Securities, and our bond counsel, Lock Lord. So, as I go through the numbers, I also want to say if there's any confusion on any numbers, if there's any things you don't understand, feel free. You've noticed over the last few months, I didn't want to, with regard to the finance, the record of expenditures, those monies are already gone. Wanted to make sure that you didn't think you were in a position to stop a spend. You can stop a contract, but if it's an expenditure on the record, it's already spent. With regard to some questions with the other departments that are here, if there's a question on wastewater and solid waste and other things, we have the answers to that. So I appreciate the opportunity to address that. And again, if there's any questions you folks would have during the course of the budget process or after, we're always interested in helping and making sure the right answer gets out there so you can go into the community and explain things. I know Alderman Cathy, he was appreciative of the bonding because people think bonding, it might be a bad thing, but in our case, it's a necessary thing with a situation where in some cases, like Department of Public Works, wastewater, solid waste, very capital intensive operations in addition to the personnel. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time.
Okay, the first item on the agenda is other general government revenue on page 32, appropriations on page 107.
So,
Want to just,
page 32, high level, as you can see in the top, that's the cable TV franchise fees for the city portion. In the miscellaneous revenue, items to note would be item 45103, that's the sale of the Sanders lot, that's a historical sale. And as you know, or may not know, $750,000 was put into an expendable trust, and $250,000 was put into an expendable trust for BIDA or bidder. The other item to note is 45208. Definitely the construction of the Performing Arts Center got a little bit complicated with the pursuit of new market tax credits, and this is an example. This is a loan that was made to Main Street Financing Corp., and they pay us, it was a $7.1 million loan, and they pay us 1% a year. And that was from the start of the program, so that's what that revenue is. Some of the other ones you know, rental 14 Court Street, leased land is a YMCA. They leased the land from the city, as well as a company called ASVG. They're the company that leases the land to put the compressed natural gas filling stations over at Riverside. We are budgeting distributions, as I mentioned, that the market tax credit and the ongoing agreements. That's what we expect to receive in revenue by way of a distribution from those companies that was set up to effectuate the building of the Performing Arts Center. And one final point, the $800,000, those are for the air rights for the developer to be able to build apartments above the School Street parking garage. So my objective here was to give you a little bit of feel for, what's been happening and the budget going forward.
are there any questions relative to what we just discussed on the revenues for other general government? Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. Mr. Griffin, this is an if. As you know, I introduced a bill into New Hampshire House to try to get the state to meet their initial 1967 obligation to pay 35% of the tax, which enticed municipalities to belong to NHRs. It had no sunset to it. It was supposed to be for perpetual. But however, it got yanked, and 12 years ago, if you remember, and we've been paying the last 12 years. And this partisan House, unfortunately, did not, even though I won it on the floor, the Senate disapproved it. But it seems to be, still have some life of a one-time shot of perhaps maybe $2 million. The governor has not signed it, so we are talking a little bit of hypotheticals. Would that go into the NHRS reimbursement account?
Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, typically or historically, when there was a subsidy, and I was fortunate to be here for the last year of the subsidy, so I knew kind of how it worked, it would be a reduction in the city's rates. So depending how they fund it, would depend on where it would be. It could be a reduction in our NHRS rates, employer rates, they call it. I don't envision them maybe sending us a check. I think it would come off the rates because it would be, you're talking about a 7.5% one-time reduction. So I would think they would want to have the NHRS provide that benefit by adjusting their working rates.
I think your explanation is more fiscally sound in doing that, correct? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you explain the new market that you talked about for 45,208 and 45,885. Could you explain that for me? Or for us?
Yeah, I'll try, but I'm also gonna share with you that there was a comprehensive, what was referred to as omnibus piece of legislation that some of the members of the current board reviewed, and I can get you that, but essentially, new market tax credits are designed to do just that, create new market, profit-oriented efforts. So a lot of things had to happen. We had to sell, so we purchased the Alex Shoe Store, and then we had to sell it because we couldn't own it as a municipality and be able to get the credits. There has to be, because if you think about it, it's a tax credit. Someone's buying that to save on their taxes. So it definitely worth a read and an understanding. What's happening here, what I'm trying to show here are the transactions. And that's why Ms. Evans and I put them in Department 118 because there was really no other place to put it on the revenue side. And I'm gonna go into the expense side as well, but that's kind of how that works. But it was a complicated set of transactions that took a number of months to gather, to gain it.
So by the way, when that went through, there were numerous meetings of the Board of Aldermen to explain it, because it's kind of complicated, but maybe, possibly we could get them a copy of the presentation that was given.
Yep.
Quick follow-up.
Follow-up?
Are you then saying that, I think I understand it, you couldn't own that building, so you loaned who was going to buy the building the money to buy it, and then they pay us back on that loan?
Mr. Griffin?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, subject to check, again, very complicated. The construction cost of the facility was $25 million. Part of the construction cost included that $2 million purchase of the building. Then they took the building and through this corporation that was created called Impact, NPAC, they're in charge with making sure the building gets constructed and have all kinds of contracts with the management company, the oversight management, construction management company, et cetera. But it's definitely worth better than what I can do here. And as Chairman Dowd mentions, there's a lot of reading material and there's tapes of meetings, and it was a few years ago that was approved.
All said, Alderman Kathy?
Yeah, I am, thank you.
Alderman O'Brien?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just for a little housekeeping for the clerk, we welcome Alderman Lopez, who joined the meeting at 7:16. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you please review line 45-103? You said it was the sale of the Sanders lot, and you mentioned that the proceeds from the sale went into a couple of trust funds. Could you repeat what trust funds and how much, please?
Mr. Griffin?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. I know $250,000 went into the BIDA Expendables Trust Fund. That's an organization that's helped work on projects that are important to the city. Renaissance, I think that was their project, the Renaissance Apartments. The $750,000. That's at the end of your book, Alderman Sullivan, and that is an expendable trust fund. I want to make sure I have the name right. But essentially, that $750,000 was to help the East Hollis Street area to create some type of either athletic or some type of area for that location to have some recreational activity. But I will get you the setup of that particular expendable trust fund.
Wasn't it also part of the redevelopment of a circle there at the end of that, the bridge from Hudson? Which hasn't happened. Follow up, Alderman Sullivan?
Yes. Are you looking for that now? I didn't want to fire another question at you.
I'm looking for it, but I'm not, I remember seeing it, and I just have to look a little bit longer.
Page 308, bottom of the page.
Pardon me?
308,
308.
bottom of the page.
Last entry on the page.
East Side Recreation
Yep.
Facilities?
There you go, yep, thank you, Alderman Wilshire.
Follow up, Alderman Sullivan?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anywhere that I see 201 Main Street Real Estate Corp., that's essentially the Performing Arts Center?
That's correct.
Okay. I know you explained it, but the way I understand from what your explanation was is that we anticipate $289,402 in revenue from the PAC in fiscal year 2023.
That's correct.
And then also, we anticipate about 71,000 interest from the loan that organization made to the city or NPAC or?
That loan is started the day we lent the money, December of 2000, it's either 19 or 20, pandemic kind of. But that 71,000, that's guaranteed. That's gonna come in every year. The estimated revenue for the other items, the distribution depends on when the Performing Arts Center opens. It becomes operational. But just to kind of tie the loop between expenses and revenue, NPAC does not have cash flow unless we pay them. So, and this was kind of something that people didn't quite understand, but I'm gonna tell you that if we operated that on July 1st of this year, we would pay $500,000 in what's called base rent. We would also pay the tax bill, which let's estimate that at $150,000, subject to check. And then there's another agreement for the furniture and fixtures and equipment to run the place. So we need to pay those first, and that gives them the cash to pay us through what's called a distribution. It's not a one-for-one, but pretty close. So we hired an individual, Neil Cannon. Mr. Cannon was an expert at New Market Tax Credit Design. And he appeared before the Board of Aldermen and explained it, but there's a flow chart that if you haven't seen it, I'll certainly send it to you, but it has like the 4 items that I'm speaking about. It's got base rent, it's got equipment, property taxes, and this loan.
Okay. Yeah, I would anxiously await to review that.
Yeah, it was a very complex financial situation that's done with new market tax credits, so there's also recorded, I would assume, presentations that you could go through. We went through several of them.
Could I just make a follow-up?
Follow-up?
I've had 3 different people try to explain the PAC to me, and after every meeting, I've left with an ice cream headache.
Yep.
It's out there a lot of those meetings.
That's why it took several meetings before we understood what they were doing.
So if that's out there, I would appreciate it.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, Alderman Sullivan explained it well. We did too. But once, I would review, if you possibly can. Mr. Cannon was brilliant in his presentation that took a very complex subject and was able to gear it down that this board could completely understand it. So it's well worth the review. It's well worth for the public to review.
Sure.
If they have any additional questions, because he did a fine job in explaining it.
Okay. Any other questions on the revenue? We go to page 107, which is the appropriation.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this particular set of line items is for the rent. So the rent, as I mentioned, is gonna begin at $500,000 a year. And the taxes are called supplemental rent, additional rent. So I'm estimating $400,000 to be the $250,000, roughly $250,000 of base rent opening, without knowing much more than just saying it, a January 1st opening. And then the tax bill, the total tax bill needs to be paid, and I'm just putting a number in here of $150,000. These items need to be appropriated by the Board of Aldermen to be able to spend them. And the one below is half of year worth of the amounts committed to purchasing the equipment and the fixtures and things like that. So if I started with this page, it might have been better, because then this gives them the money, and then the revenue, they're paying us back. We have to work out the timing.
Probably not helping with the ice cream headache. But I think the presentations go a long way. All right, anything else on page 107? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to Department 126, revenues on page 33, appropriations on 111.
So this particular page has a number of financially driven revenues. The first one of note is the payments in lieu of taxes. So the payments in lieu of taxes is going up because we have agreements with Dartmouth Hitchcock and Southern New Hampshire Medical. We also have agreements with the Hunt community in Nashua Housing. So I think, subject to check, I think those are the four. And they'll total this amount in fiscal '23. The next set of income is the interest on the taxes. So 41,300 is the interest that we receive prior to the leaning process. The next line below is when people have been liened and they come in and say, oh my God, I've got a lien on my property for the first time in my life. They come in and they pay us the interest. So that's, it can be volatile, but we put in 275 on the first one and 550 on the second one. And if you have any questions, you can ask me along the way. The next grouping of income for a city is licenses and permits. The lead dog here is if you own and operate a vehicle in New Hampshire, you know what that's all about. So we collect permit fees, and the 11 million is a very conservative number. Believe it or not, in the recession, when I came here in 2010, it was down around 9 million, but it's grown to about 15 million. We don't want to overly and aggressively get used to that amount, but what we do with the money is the mayor has proposed to the Board of Aldermen to use about $4 million a year to what they call buy down the tax rate. And every 2 million roughly is 1% on the tax rate. So as part of our planning, we traditionally have used 4 million of motor vehicle revenue to buy down the tax rate. The other thing we do with motor vehicle revenue is and you'll see this later when I go over the highway paving program, special revenue account, is we take $1.1 million of motor vehicle revenue and put it to fund the debt service associated with that bond planning. But I'll go into that, but I wanted to, you're gonna ask a good question, you know, we're through April, and we've already got 12.1 million. So if you add a couple more million, we're gonna be up around the $13, $14 million range by the time we end the year. The other fees, just nominal fees to process the permits. Rooms and meals, that's another one that I know Alderman O'Brien is always looking at, but last year, we were fortunate to get about 6.5 million in rooms and meals tax, which is a significant increase. They've done some changes to the legislation up there. They've also reduced, I think, very subtly the rooms and meals tax itself. But this is what you'll learn through the tax setting process is this is a number that the Department of Revenue actually puts in our calculation. We can't change this particular number. We can change some local revenue numbers and be conservative, but they get their information from the state. They put it in our tax calculation. So that's 6.5 we're looking forward to getting. Interest income, that's always a tough one. We do have sizable investments, but we can't be aggressive in our investments. They're more in the nature of like a term, like a one-year CD or things like that. But that we budget a number there, try to reach it. We may be seeing a situation where the interest rates go up a lot more than they have in the past. So we put 700,000 in there. And nothing else of note on that front. So with that, if there's any questions on this page, I'd be happy to
Any
answer.
questions? Alderman Wiltshire?
Yeah, the 48,000 in the motor vehicle reclamation admin fee, what is that 48,000?
That's a fee that we're able to charge that we had never put in the budget before. And this year, Ms. Evans and I said, let's put that fee in the revenue.
Where does the fee come from?
Oh, the fee is a charge to a registration. I think it's a $3, I'll get you specifics, but I
Okay.
believe it's a $3
For registering your vehicle?
to register a vehicle.
Okay.
Right.
All set.
Yeah, I was just curious
Any
why we
other-
hadn't done that before.
Any other questions on this page? Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you please explain again the payments in lieu of taxes, AKA the pilot?
Okay.
Mr. Griffin?
I'll give it a shot. Some of the operations in the city are able to indicate that they're charitable in nature. So specifically, the hospitals, they're nonprofits. But I've been to hospitals and I paid the bills. Not sure they're too charitable, but that being said, they don't feel as though their charitable operations should be taxed they should be exempt from taxation. So our city attorney works with the hospital's team and comes up with a payment in lieu of taxes. So they're not gonna get a tax bill, they're gonna get another type of bill.
These are agreements done by our corporation counsel office with these different groups, and to come to an agreement on a equitable payment to the city in lieu of taxes. Alderman Wiltshire?
So with the redevelopment of the Bronstein property, does that change the pilot for the housing authority?
Mr. Mr. Griffin?
I mean, there's more density, right, there's more.
Yeah, let me make sure I can answer that, and if I can't answer it here, I can follow up.
Right,
But
that's fine.
they actually, the Housing Authority, dating back to, I believe, 1947, they
Right.
calculate their own payment. They have to submit to, based on their rents, and there's two forms, and one check is larger than the other. I believe we get like 143,000 on one form and 12,000 on another. And the team over there actually calculates it as a form, so it's a little unique. Not sure how the construction and then the eventual habitation of the Bronstein would affect it, but David would be working with, former treasurer Fredette would be working with the Housing Authority and the lady over there, and we'd get the money, but it's not sure about how Bronstein would affect the value of the check coming to the city.
Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. So why, the original budget in '22 was 420, and in '23, it's 2.5x? What's driving that?
Very good question. So the recently negotiated agreements with Southern New Hampshire and Dartmouth Hitchcock, we had billed them full taxes. So last year, going into this fiscal '22 budget, we didn't know that there would be payment in lieu of tax agreements executed. So what we need to do now is abate the bills we rendered and then recognize the payment in lieu of taxes revenue in this fiscal year. And next year, we're planning to bill them according to the agreements that they signed.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm told that Alderman Sullivan, bring your mic closer. I think everyone needs to bring their mics closer.
Madam President, if you put your microphone in front of you,
Thank you,
that would help.
okay.
All right, Alderman Lopez?
I'm not sure I understood the response in terms of the vehicle reclamation fee. How is that being accounted for in previous budgets? You said it wasn't in the budget, but there was revenue being generated?
There was revenue, it was captured but not budgeted.
Can you explain the difference?
Well, the difference is the fund would, it would not be included in the revenue. It would be included in another, not budgeted. We do have accounts of funds that are not budgeted, but they produce revenue and there was expenses against it. But I'll get you a better answer on that, Alderman Lopez.
Yeah, and also maybe a list of the different areas, because I don't think in the years of budgeting, I may have missed that section or something, but I know that there's some departments that generate revenue that is for a certain purpose or is necessary to their operation. And I think that's what you're describing.
Right.
But I definitely I would like
Yeah,
to list.
it would be
so that I
more
can
in the
check on
form
who
of
that
a
is.
special, I'm sorry to interrupt, but more in the form of a special revenue type of fund.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Alderman Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Correct me if I'm wrong, isn't the School Street project, don't they also have a pilot for the parking garage where they're paying us a payment instead of the property taxes on the actual parking structure of the project? Or is that for something, or is that for another project?
Mr. Griffin?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, I can address that. As you recall, Tuesday, Mr. Cummings presented the TIF, the special revenue, we call it a special revenue fund for the TIF for School Street. So what's going to happen there's going to be value created from really nothing, taxed at the rates of property taxes per thousand. And those dollars are going to be captured as the revenue stream going into that TIF to pay for the expenses associated with the TIF, to include the debt service associated with the construction of the parking garage and other maintenance types costs in that School Street area. So in summary, it's not a payment in lieu of taxes. It's a capturing of taxes in a tax increment financing fund.
I understand the TIF part, I just thought we also had to a pilot with that building as well, but I'm probably mistaken in that. So, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any other questions? Then we'll move on to,
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Alderman
Thank you,
O'Brien.
Mr. Chairman. Just additional clerk housekeeping. We are joined via Zoom. Alderman Como has joined us.
Okay. So the next area is on page 111. It's financial services, proposed budget, general fund. Mr. Griffin?
Certainly. So as I mentioned at the outset, there's changes within the makeup of the personnel in the financial services division, but at the end of the process, the line 51,100 is 2.29% more than last year. So we tried to be cognizant of a reasonable budget that has the right people in the right spots to provide the services that the financial services division is in charge of. In the budget book itself, I tried to articulate the different areas within the division. But essentially, under my direction, we have my CFO office, comptroller, treasury, tax and billing, and motor vehicle registration. Those are the main areas that we focus on. We have, as far as personnel, we have unaffiliated. You folks had questions on that, and I suggested to Chairman Dowd that Director Kleiner handle those questions, which he did last week.
Right.
We also have the UAW. We have a combination, mostly clerical and technical. As you know, there's a professional and then a clerical technical. We mostly have those, and those are your clerks. There's items in the actuals because of the transition in time of things with our trust accountant retiring, treasurer for debt retiring. Retirement and separation, that's where you see the costs associated with some of these retirements in the fiscal year 2022. Going forward, we need the wages full-time, the overtime. I'm not sure if anybody has explained to you what the last line is, but let me see if I can do it. 51,990. That's a partial week chargeback. Sometimes there's 53 weeks in a year for payroll purposes, so you try to recognize the expense annually, and then in the seventh year, you somehow are able to fund the budget without needing a special appropriation to take care of the final commitments to the workers. And this line is gonna be in most budgets. Going down, not gonna go through each one, but if you have questions, fine. Slight increase in the accounting and auditing services, the external. This group does a lot of billing and mailing, which will result in sending tax bills out timely and so forth. And then down in the other services, you have the postage and delivery. We have a lot of pieces of mail, so, and we seem to be mailing out more pieces, so 88,000 is the budget for that. But I'd be happy to answer any other
Any
questions.
questions on financial services? Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The cell phone bill, 600 to 2,400.
So I was the individual that got the cell phone at the request of the former mayor, Lozo, because she wanted to call me. But in any event, no, in all seriousness, some of my other more senior position team members, they're like always being called by me and others, so we thought it best to fund their allowance, and I don't know if anybody's explained it, but it's not the complete cost of a cell phone, it's an allowance.
Okay.
So it's a $50 allowance against the cost of the phone. It doesn't get into, iPhone 15 or whatever the latest version is. It's really a modest expression of trying to compensate city workers for using their personal phone.
Okay, thank you.
You're
I have
welcome.
a follow-up on, this is more specific to the personnel in your department, and I appreciate the discussion that you had leading into this, but I did notice that you did add an accounting supervisor. So the way I understood it is that is a way for you to build the bench in the financial services, on the financial services team, because essentially you have about one less part-time employee year over year, yet the wages went up. So I kind of circled that to be the accounting supervisor position. So if you could just talk through that a little bit, I appreciate it.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you. Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
the accounting supervisor, well, let me back up. We had a long-term employee that was a UAW senior financial analyst. Person did great work for the city for over 20 years. She retired end of the year, and Ms. Evans, who became the comptroller, and I were talking about additional bench strength to someone that we could groom to possibly be the next comptroller. So what we're doing is we're not gonna hire the senior financialist position. We're going to hire a unaffiliated accounting supervisor person. There was some moving parts in the process, so the senior financial analyst in '22 retired. The treasurer tax collector retired. Treasury and budget assistant, we never filled it. The other thing we did was, through the pandemic, it became pretty clear that we needed to do something in motor vehicle registration, and what we found was having a resource coordinator out front would be very helpful. We have an appointment setting system, but we also allow walk-ins. So this particular resource, who was we contracted for a number of months, we brought that person in and reduced the head count in the motor vehicle clerks themselves. So if you can imagine, you have an individual that's right for the position, does a great job. It's very helpful, as opposed to opening that area and just walking in and trying to navigate the new designed motor vehicle area. And we've gotten tremendous feedback. People like the queuing up and a human being actually talking to them. So that's been helpful. So that's, when you put everything in the meat grinder, we're slightly over last year's budget for wages in this particular department.
Follow-up, Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you very much. I was surprised to see, it's more of a comment, but a question. I was surprised to see the comptroller was not a full-time position.
Now, Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes,
may.
Mr. Griffin.
Yeah, where you see what you think is a full-time position, your instincts are correct, full-time. Part of her salary is charged to wastewater and solid waste, so there's a few. Our deputy treasurer tax collector, same thing. She's responsible for the billing of the wastewater bills and overseeing the function of billing solid waste when necessary. But that's in the, Chairman Dowd urged us to put in the back of the book, the team members that have charged for more than one area. So you'll see that at the very end of the book. We've done it a number of different ways, but you'll see it at the very end of the book.
It used to be difficult when people were charging different departments, different divisions to track down their salary, and so we had
So-
that put in the book.
So
Okay.
specifically, starts on page 301.
Any other questions on financial services? All right, seeing none. We'll now move on to capital improvements, capital equipment on page 306.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, we
Yes.
have and have had for years a capital equipment reserve fund. That is where, on the city side, and actually we added the school to the list, that is where equipment is staged to be purchased in a fiscal year. So for fiscal '23, working with the team members of the fire department, police department, public works, school, and other departments that need vehicles. This is the array of vehicles that we are requesting the Board of Aldermen to approve through the budget process. When I first arrived, there was a SURF committee, a couple of members from the Board of Aldermen, a member from the outside public, and it just became overly burdensome to find someone to attend the meeting. So late Alderman McCarthy made this presentation to the Board of Aldermen probably 6 or 7 years ago, and it's worked well. What happens here is once you approve this, that fund does not lapse. I just had a communication with Chief Buxton. He's having a heck of a time getting a C4. You might know what that truck is, the deputy parts, and everything's back ordered, so it's difficult. So what you're doing here, just like you did last year, you're approving the schedule of purchases. And what will happen is each one of these divisions will communicate with the purchasing department, properly procure the vehicle, and come before the finance department to get it approved. So you're approving kind of the amount or the type of vehicle, et cetera, and then you'll see notations, according to the SURF schedule, the funding is there, and this is how it works. With pricing going up to the extent, there's a 10% increase over what was expected. Dave Fredette used to do it, but I will be communicating with the Finance Committee and the Board of the price increase and why, and to the extent there's funds, there's savings in other areas of the SURF, but why you should move forward and purchase the vehicle.
You all set with that?
Oh, I have a question.
The,
His hand was up first.
Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Alderman Sullivan. Appreciate it. I appreciate the list here. Just from my perspective, I would love a bird's eye, and I was wondering if we have a list of all of the trucks or vehicles that the city has with mileage, life used, or life left, or whatever the case may be, so we can get sort of a larger scope of what we have. I think it would be helpful to know if we have that inventory list of what the city has and the mileage and different information. Is that available?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, so just before I arrived in 2010, Mayor Lozo conducted comprehensive review of the fleet and did a nice job determining what was not salvageable, what should go forward, and work with all the departments. So we've got a pretty good system down now, but we have all the vehicles cataloged. So we have just what you're asking. And prior to that, my predecessor, Mr. Gilbar, prior to that, as Chairman Dowd knows, and Clerk O'Brien, they used to set aside a certain amount every year, kind of like, if the vehicle's gonna last 10 years, they put 10% in. Prior to that, municipalities would have, they'd try to have the department put skin in the game, so they'd fund half of it through their operating budget and make up the other half in the SURF. Mr. Gilbar said, you know, it's too complicated. So let's figure out how much life is left on these vehicles and determine the amount necessary when you want to replace it. So in this particular case, we need, from the general fund, we need, from the SURF account, we need like 2.2 million to buy all of these vehicles. So it works well, people understand it, but you're asking for a lot of information that we have.
Okay, great.
I mean, Chairman Dowd has been, we've just never been able to put it together, but it is, Mr. Fredette and I had a presentation, I think, back in 12 or 13, and it gets pretty complicated, but you're gonna see the array of vehicles, and this is a small subset of the vehicles. You're gonna see the fire trucks, the ladder trucks, the pumpers, you're gonna see the police vehicles, you're gonna see the command vehicles, you see all of it, and the DPW has a lot as well, as you can imagine.
If
Follow-up?
if a capital improvements program is working correctly, you would list all of the vehicles, you would figure out how long they had left, and you'd divide that number by the replacement cost, including some for inflation, and you put that kind of money aside every year. We haven't done that, because it's quite a sum of money. We also buy most of our vehicles via cash. The more expensive ones lately we've been buying with a bond, because the bond's so low, it's better for us. But the way we do it now is they come to an agreement with all the divisions as to what needs to be replaced, and then it's funded via this page. So, I got a whole bunch of people with questions, but you got a follow-up?
I do, yeah, real quick. I appreciate that, and I understand the list. I just would like the whole list of all the vehicles, if it's available, number one. Number two, curiosity, with the market being the way that it is, let's suppose that they think there's a certain replacement cost to a vehicle, and we approve this list, and then they go out to the marketplace and they find out that that vehicle is indeed a little bit more expensive given the marketplace. Would they then come to us and ask for an appropriation through budget or finance higher than that amount, and then that money would have to come from somewhere else rather than this approved list? How would that work?
So, Mr. Chairman, it has happened from time to time. We anticipate more because of inflationary pressures. But in that ordinance that was passed about SURF, it has the ability for the Board of Aldermen to approve any increase that's greater than 10%. But what former Treasurer Fredette had done and what I have done, what I'm gonna do is we need to let you know that we have funds available. The SURF is it's not, it has more in it than just what's listed here.
Oh, okay.
But what you need to know is we've been unable to fund SURF in the way that Chairman Dowd's indicated. And we've been we've presented a budget here with no money going into SURF. You're gonna see that it's zero when I get to the transfer page. But what we do is, we're fortunate to have appropriations not spent at the end of, and I know there's questions on year-end things, and I'm happy to answer, but we have to fund, like the first thing we do, the mayor and I, we get together and say, how much do we need in SURF for next year? And so we're kind of a year ahead, but that's the process. You'll get a communication by me working with any one of these departments and explaining the situation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
By the way, there are times that the divisions, when they talk with the mayor and Mr. Griffin, and it may be slated for purchase this year, but in order to keep that money at a reasonable rate, they push it off a year or two. And also, there are other things that happen, like the fire department was able to get a deal with 2 pumper trucks. They were gonna replace one year, one another year, and they got a package deal and saved several $100,000. So it was advantageous to do that. Okay, you're all set?
I'm all set, thank you.
All right. I think I had Alderman Sullivan, then Alderman Kelly, and then Alderman Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we buy new vehicles, the vehicles that we're gonna replace, do we take that used vehicle, do we try to resell it? Is there a marketplace to resell it? Can we use it as a trade-in to help offset the cost?
Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Chairman, we can do any of those things. There is, if it's really junk, there's a statewide program to get rid of vehicles. A lot of times they trade them in because they do have some value. And we tried kind of outright sales when purchasing manager Bob Gabriel was here, and it's a lot of work. So a lot of it, especially the police vehicles, the pursuit vehicles, they're traded in. So you're gonna see that. And then each vehicle is assigned a life expectancy. So when you look at the list, we try to give the age of the vehicle, but the pursuit vehicles on the police department, it's 100,000 miles. They have their own maintenance, fleet maintenance, and they've determined that anything more than 100,000, you're paying a lot of money on the fixing up and the keeping it in top shape. So that, and as Alderman O'Brien knows, on the fire side, they have a life expectancy on the apparatus. Front line, back line, and then if the vehicle still has the wheels on it and runs, might be another city, but not probably a city, a town might have interest in buying it. The fees are quite nominal. It's just like you'd expect if you went and bought a car, or you trade your car in, you're not gonna get as much as you
Mr. Chairman,
think.
I know there's others, but indirect to what
I think you're gonna cover what I was gonna cover, go ahead.
Mr. Griffin said, an important piece such as a piece of fire apparatus, you need headlights, you need warning lights, and electronics fail. So the truck is out of service, it will definitely get into some form of chaos or havoc. The apparatus that is no longer frontline pieces is put into reserve status. The mechanic will take that truck and find out what, my example, what the electrical problem is, and the reserve piece will become the frontline piece. And therefore, no district is left uncovered. And another thing you gotta keep in mind, insurance rates are established by the ISO, and they look at the life expectancy of the apparatus. Now, you can cheat, but that means the taxpayer is gonna pay higher insurance premiums in the city if the apparatus does not meet the qualifications. So this is it. And at the end of the life cycle, sometimes they are traded off, and I think what Mr. Griffin was looking for is the famous White Farm, which is run by the state, I think, in Concord, to which some of that apparatus, but you gotta look at Public Works in the example, they spread salt. And what we all know about salt in the back of any vehicle eats away. So, these vehicles go through, for the citizens, they are getting the bang for the buck, Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just to simplify what he said, when we buy a fire truck, a new one, the one that it's replacing goes into reserve, and it's there to be used, like, for instance, we had a new ladder truck that had, and it's totally electronic, trust me, the whole thing, and they had a problem with it, had to go back to the manufacturer. Well, we didn't get rid of the old ladder truck, so that replaced it for quite a while. And then when the new one came back, that one went back in reserve. And the one that's in the reserve, that's when they usually sell it. And that goes into the general revenue fund, I believe, Mr. Griffin.
Right, correct.
So, I think I had Alderman Kelly.
And thank you, Alderman Kelly, for my interruption.
Oh, no problem. Just wanted to say thank you to, the departments and what we've seen before, that they do make a lot of concessions and help us in this area. I did want to ask.
Make sure your mic is close enough.
Yeah, I
especially with the
realized,
mask.
I was looking down, realizing I've got a mask and it's not close enough. That's good. I'm sort of interested in new technology and how often that's evaluated with what's put on this reserve list? Do they look at it every year? Obviously, you know, for example, the police department looked at hybrids a couple of years ago, determined it was a little too new. But are we looking at that, and also are we looking at it from a financial perspective in terms of, you know, gas is high, electric vehicles have lower maintenance, that kind of thing?
Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Chairman, that's looked at quite frequently now. The police department is gonna have some hybrid vehicles that they're gonna purchase. We have compressed natural gas refuse trucks, really a tough sell back about 10 years ago for those individuals that like diesel. Now it looks like, you know, diesel, whatever you need for diesel, you might not be able to get, so. But we've looked at that technology back when I first came on. There was a task force made up of a few of Mayor Lozo's staff, including Director Photo. They brought on those vehicles, those compressed natural gas vehicles. So I think they look at them almost as, especially the cars. I know Director Photo looks at combination, electric, gas, natural gas, those types of things. So it's at the forefront. And then with the energy manager, Ms. Brown, it's very helpful to have a person that, with that type of knowledge of what's out there, not only on, you know, electricity, hydro, but also those alternate vehicles.
If I could follow up, please?
Yeah, one other thing, I was at DPW this afternoon. The only thing they would look at right now for electronic or hybrid is cars. The technology's not at a place where any of their trucks or major vehicles could be replaced. The technology's just not there yet. Alderman Kelly, follow up?
Thank you. I understand that the technology is emerging, but my question again to then would be, as these technologies come out, would it be appropriate to put some level of funding in SURF for infrastructure for those types of technologies?
Mr. Griffin?
Mr. Chairman, it would be, for example, a prime example was the police vehicles they're $3,000 more than the alternative. So in SURF, we put the extra $3,000 in the vehicle. You might be asking, you know, is there a more comprehensive, you know, we carve out a couple of $100,000 for looking at things and trying things?
If I could clarify, more
Okay.
like infrastructure, like if say for example, the police department went all electric, we would then have to have a place for them to charge. So the infrastructure that would be required to run these new technologies, would it be appropriate for us to start thinking about that and including it in SURF?
I would say that it would be appropriate as a funding source.
I mean, we're
Could
not
be.
funding this yet, but
Right.
That's something probably should be worked out with the energy manager, Nori Brown.
I work with
See
her
what
on
your
the-
plan is going forward. I got Alderman Lopez. Did you have-
Yes.
So I'm not gonna ask about the Eagle compressor.
Oh, okay, I got you.
So many questions. But the SURF, we've been talking mostly about vehicles, and I understand that's its primary purpose. But I know there was some discussion last year about purchasing a backup server, using SURF as a vehicle for that, no pun intended. And I know we just purchased a whole bunch of radios. Is SURF restricted to vehicles, or is that just traditionally what capital expense means, a big charge?
Mr. Griffin?
I don't think it's restricted, but that's how it's been used.
Okay.
Usually on the IT side, they fund it and either bond it or they budget it through a, you know, specific purpose. But we funded things like revaluations in here, and that I believe was duly allowed from several decades ago because they needed a funding source for the reval at that time. But we haven't really put IT servers in here at this point. Doesn't mean we couldn't, but
But this year's priorities are basically
Alderman
vehicles.
Lopez,
Correct.
Follow up?
I just need the
Okay.
confirmation. Thanks.
Alderman Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's say that a department like the police department, they're looking at 1, 2, 3, they're looking at 8 interceptors. Let's say that they decide that they need a 9th interceptor for their department. Could they purchase a vehicle out of their own budget outside of the SURF, or is that the vehicle that they, no pun intended again, that they need to use in order to purchase those vehicles? Or can they use their own budgets or come ask for an appropriation from the Board of Aldermen?
Mr. Griffin?
They could do all of that. I don't think there's any restriction, but they tend to use SURF to buy their vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
I just say that from time to time, there might be an accident, unfortunately, and the vehicle's totaled. They need to buy a new one,
Right.
which is made up of a combination of insurance proceeds, subrogation on the person that hit them, or other things. But they generally like to have, or plan to have these amounts of vehicles. They generally purchase every year a set of pursuit vehicles.
Thank you.
Yeah, the police department usually doesn't have an extra 45,000. And by the way, these prices are when they buy in bulk, they're buying 8 cars, getting an 8-car price, not one.
Right.
So
I just-
one would be more than 45,000.
I just
And the
was
fire
more-
department, they definitely don't have the funding to buy a new replacement vehicle, no matter what it is, because those are expensive.
Yeah.
Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. You did tickle something that I would like to say, and Alderman Kathy, as these things pop up, you'll probably see something like on the City of Boston, coming up and purchasing, police interceptors. And you'll say, what does Boston have to do with Nashua? They do search for combined buying power with different counties, different municipalities, including the state, trying to get the best bang for the taxpayer's buck into doing that. So if you're on the Finance Committee, you'll see these oddities drift in, but that's what they're actually doing. Because you say, what does Boston has to do with a police cruiser from Nashua? But has a lot to do. Boston bought 6, we bought the 7th one,
Oh, great.
so.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this list? Okay, we'll go to capital improvements on page 217, 218. And whenever you're ready, Mr. Griffin.
So, Mr. Chairman, we have about $1 million budget for capital, which, professionally speaking, is extremely low for the amount of assets that we have, but unfortunately, this is the number that we have, and we try to respect the Capital Improvement Committee and put things in that make sense, given the budget constraints. Now, several years ago, before we had the paving program, we'd have a $2 million budget, and $1 million would be paving. So we've come a long way with regard to that. So the capital improvements page, work on that. What's interesting is the top of the list is the airport, and you might say, why the heck are we funding things for the airport? This is like 5% of what the total bill is. So there's 90% federal, 5% state, and the other 5. So to construct a apron off-ramp, $200,000, that's a big project. So these are the two that the leadership at the airport came before the Capital Improvement Committee, and we fund this.
As former chairman of the Airport Authority, we've done this for, I hate to say it, decades. And the last 2 years, though, the federal government did 100%, but they're back to the 95-5. So the state kicks in 5, we kick in 5, and so it's a good return on investment to, because something we ought to do it again, because we haven't done it for a while. It's amazing when you hear the revenue generated to the city by the airport being here. There is a number of companies that have aircraft that come in and out of here, so maybe we ought to arrange that later, but it's not part of the budget per se. Any other questions? Alderman Kathy?
2 questions. One, and maybe Chairman Dowd could answer this question. What makes the determination for capital improvement? How does something get used, or how do we use capital improvement money for a particular project rather than it coming out of another line item of the budget? How does that
Is-
process work?
Is a capital improvements group, and they go over all the department division capital requests and select and rank them in A, B, C, and then numerically under that. And then they sit down with the mayor and Mr. Griffin, and they come up with a list that would be funded this year. If you look at I think everybody got a copy of the capital improvements committee. There are a lot of things that aren't funded this year. I can tell you one change I'm gonna make is the last line, which is the capital improvements, deferred maintenance for the school district. We have over $1 billion in replacement costs for 18 schools. And $100,000 in deferred maintenance does not cut it, unless you want to be replacing school buildings a lot more often. Alderman Jettie can attest that 2 years ago, I think, the school department had to replace a pump at the high school, $90,000. And there were a lot of questions. A pump, 90,000? No, the pump, as Alderman Jettie can attest, was as big as a Volkswagen. It had to pump water up 4 stories. So that's the deferred maintenance cost. And maybe sometime after, not too long, we can take all the new aldermen on a tour of the different high-vac and systems in the high schools, because they're amazing.
To that point, if I may, and you would probably be best to answer this because you handle a lot of the school stuff, why would this deferred maintenance be a capital improvement rather than be a part of the regular educational budget?
Because the city finance and the mayor decided that's where it should be. It's not in the school budget. You'll see all the deferred maintenance for the fire department. I think it's fire and police are both in here, right? Yep, they're all in here. Police department, well, that was body cameras, 350,000, but in 2003, the deferred maintenance for the fire department is 50,000. And I can tell you that just about covers the minimums.
So then
Sure, they'll tell that when you come in.
is it typical for deferred maintenance of different departments to come out of the capital improvements budget rather than their own operating budget?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Alderman Lopez was quicker with his hand.
Yep, just with regards to the capital improvement committee, isn't that, doesn't that, our requirement to have that come from the city's charter?
Yes.
Gonna
And
have to do
I
it.
forget who's the liaison to that from the Board of Aldermen,
Clemens, maybe?
maybe. Yes, Alderman Jettie?
I thought you were asking who the liaison is.
Yes.
It's me.
Oh. By the way, just so you know, can you confirm the 90,000 for the pump that we went in, remember we did that tour? That was one big pump. But anyway, so.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
some of the directors have already been here, but I would encourage on the SURF schedule, if you have questions, or this particular array of capital, ask them. They, like Mr. Sullivan, Director Sullivan, Chief Rourke, Chief Buxton, DPW Director Photo, they're the ones that the mayor and I work with to create this, so they'll know the intimate details of what they're trying to accomplish with this amount of funds.
Oh, sorry, I have one more. It's more of a
Alderman
person.
Kathy?
Thank you. Chief, or Mr. Griffin. From a budgetary standpoint, if I want to understand more about accounting and budgeting, is there a difference between, let's use the deferred maintenance for fire or schools, is there a difference or advantage or disadvantage for having that money come from a capital improvements budget that is decided between the mayor and capital improvements committee rather than coming out of line items from those specific departments? Does it make a difference because it's all the same money, it's all going to the same thing? Or is there a reason why it's broken out like this from an accounting perspective?
Griffin?
There isn't a difference. You're gonna see when Mr. Donovan, who's the chief operating officer of the school, comes in, he's gonna have a lot of lines that are large. that are fixing things. This was just a tradition, this is something I think we all inherited, and as the Chairman Dowd says, it's nominal. They've got millions of dollars of deferred maintenance at the school. The fire, they try to do the best they can. City buildings, you've seen the expendable trust fund there. And since I've been here, we've retrofitted, recreated a bunch of schools. And as I mentioned, Alderman Jettie and the colleagues on the CIP, it's hard to start now. Prices are high, you can't, I'll give you an example, and this is per memory. City of Cambridge, Massachusetts has a $800 million operating budget and an $85 million capital budget. It doesn't kind of make sense to me, but I mean, it's a funding thing. $302 million operating and a $1 million capital. So that's why that bonding presentation that we did is critical. Is it, you know, but you have to replace things. Fortunately, on the school side, you're gonna have all of this federal ESSER funds that are gonna help, but.
I wasn't concerned about necessarily the expenditure or the money. I was more a curiosity about budgeting and accounting and presentation of the numbers. If it's all the same, then I understand that. If there's no disadvantage or advantage, you're just presenting it a different way out of a different account. Money's still the same. So that's really what I was getting at. I'm not
Okay.
really necessarily against the actual amounts.
I believe it's set up by ordinance, and I think the front of that capital improvements book explains a little better.
Okay.
Does.
All right, Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General question about the capital improvement project. That this is funded through the general fund?
That's correct.
Is it possible that any of the funds that you lay out here can be funded through a trust fund?
So let me make sure I understand it. That could there be a trust fund that could pay for one of these items?
Yes, sir.
As Chairman Dowd mentioned on numerous occasions, we have a lot of expendable trust funds, and they're pretty specific with what you can spend the money on. Generally, those are set up because something happened. We ran out of money in welfare. We had excessive snow events. We've got, a lot of things that created all of those, and they're very specific. So at the back of the book, there's some pretty good descriptions on who the agent to expend is and what the purpose of the fund was initially.
Well, let me, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we're hoping to sit down and go through that entire list and consolidate or get rid of some of the ones that are in there and narrow it down, but as you explained, there is specific ways you can spend that money, and there's also specific spending authorities.
Yes.
So, Alderman Sullivan.
Yeah, thank you. Specifically, and this gets my attention, Court Street. Court Street, $50,000 to pay for a strategic plan. In the '23 budget, there is a request to fund the newly minted trust fund that we just created for $50,000. So my ask is, can we take the $50,000 that we've set aside for Court Street Trust Fund to apply to the $50,000? That matches, the amount matches, it all matches. So my question is, are there any other projects in here that we can tie to a trust fund to either pay for these, to help offset the general fund?
I would guess it will depend on the spending authority, and the one you just mentioned is the mayor. So he could do that. Also, a lot of things in capital improvements get funded by bonds. The bigger ones you don't see in here, because if it's something that's going to last more than 15, 20 years, it can be bonded. So there are some of the capital improvements that get bonded.
Okay.
So I don't, and the direct answer is I don't see any others that would have a kind of a similar expendable trust fund that would offset this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions on deferred maintenance? Seeing none. We go to hydrant fees, fire protection, 137.
I know where everyone is.
Probably shovel it out if you did.
So
Yeah,
does my
I
dog.
did, I have 35 years.
So, Mr. Chairman, this particular department, 159, hydrant fees, this is tariffed charges by Penachuk, as approved by the Public Utility Commission of New Hampshire. They communicate with us, working with the fire department, they add hydrants, they subtract hydrants. They do a pretty good accounting annually, and then they bill us based on the rates. So we're thinking we're going to see, we know we're gonna see an increase, and Penachuk is a regulated utility, water utility. They have very varying ways of getting revenue. Some are just traditional rates, the others are their investments in capital that they need recovery, and some are more immediate than others, but if you ever wanted them to further explain how the rate making works, you have that special Penachuk Water Committee that I'm sure Mr. Goodhue and Mr. Ware would be, Mr. Ware is like an expert in this, no question, and I asked him for a question once and I got like a page answer.
So,
And a lot of it was analytics, but no, great person.
so we get a fee for each one of these hydrants, but they're maintained and painted and everything else by the Penachuk. And you can see where they're all at, because if you go on the GIS, there's one page, it's where all the hydrants are. I wouldn't stake my life on the exact location being right on there, because we saw a couple of them in the wrong place, but it's pretty close.
But we find them.
Yeah.
If I may on that
Yes,
too,
Alderman O'Brien.
not to be the ultimate hydrant expert, but the insurance company, as I mentioned before, the ISO, the homeowners' rates are determined their proximity to the hydrant. And you probably remember when you went to get your homeowners insurance. So the fire department looks at that in the developments and requests hydrants in certain locations, but Penachuk needs to get paid. But the end result, even though looking at this number, you must remember, regardless of the size of the fire, the city does not get a water bill from the fire, from water used by the fire department at a time of emergency. Now, the flushing of toilets in the fire station is a different venue, you know, that's part of the cost. But, as you would in any domestic home, but if there's an emergency, that's basically free water to the municipality, and it comes out of this basic fee in a way.
We just recently found out as part of the, working with the DPW, the Penachuk got involved on a separate issue.
Yeah.
And we found out the DPW has never been charged for water. And that's not allowed by the PUC. So we had a meeting and I implored upon them that they couldn't stick it in the 23 budget because it'd be too late. So they're gonna collect usage for this coming year, 2023, and start charging in 2024. So water is used to wash off vehicles, water is used to, when they do the pre-treating in the winter of streets, and a number of different uses of the water out there, but now they're gonna be charged. Right? Any other questions on hydrants? Moving on to streetlights.
Yes,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman, streetlights are, on a good note, this number used to be 800,000. And Mayor Donchis, under his leadership and direction, Director Photo, changed all the lights to LED lights. Very interesting project, because one person's bright light is another person's dull light. So it was an interesting process, but the result is that our electric bills for street lights have been much lower than they were in the past. Subject to check, and you can certainly ask Director Photo, but we're on the hook for carrying the bulbs. So this streetlight maintenance, when necessary, the way I understand it is, we have the bulbs, but we don't have the expert people that can actually go up with kind of linemen, changing high voltage lights. So we meet them there. We meet them with the bulb, and they go up. And I don't know if Eversource has outsourced that, I have no idea, but they're the ones that have to replace the bulbs. And I think they've worked very well, these bulbs.
I forget how many years ago it was now, but we replaced all the city lights with LEDs. And I guess they're adjustable in 2 different intensities. We're on the lower intensity, in most places anyway. And that's why a lot of the savings in electricity. So,
And, go ahead. I'll recognize Alderman Kathy.
Alderman Gaffey?
Thank you. I see that the budget is well under for 2022, but then we're expecting almost a twofold jump for 2023 on electricity. Is there a reason why there's a disparity there?
One answer is this probably only includes 9 bills. So we're gonna get a bill, like through April would have been through, like basically bills through March.
Oh, okay.
All right.
And then the other answer would be, to the extent something happens, you don't wanna be under. So it's a reasonable budget that's been pretty consistent. And the question that you normally would ask is, what happens if there's appropriations not spent here? That's part of the end of year wrap-up
Right.
that we'll get into soon.
Anything else on streetlights? Alderman O'Brien?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to take the opportunity of a public service plug. If you have street lighting in front of your house and it doesn't come on, nobody really knows it. So it's up to each individual resident. We pay for it. And so I would appreciate, I say this every budget here, but if the residents can see if their street lights aren't working, it is coming out of the municipal budget. Please report it to, Energy North, so it could be, fixed. It could be something such as the light sensor or something like that, but it gives us for what we're paying for. So that's enough of my public service announcement.
Okay, the next item is debt service on page 210.
Yes, so Mr. Chairman, this is the debt service related to the general fund. So for city and school, we plan on paying approximately 11.2 million in principal and 6.2 million in interest. We intend to issue in 2023, so we have issuance costs. And to the extent there's other analyses that need to be done, that's the other debt service costs. So the pages following 210 show by issue, by date of issue, the ingredients of creating the principal payments on the page that I just reviewed, and interest payments. Separated by city and school.
Everybody understands what debt service is, the payment against the bonds. Any questions, Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So if we could just, I want to make sure I understand it. Page 211, let's just do the top one, Broad Street Parkway.
Yep.
In the year 2013, we borrowed $1.469 million for the parkway. And then as I go to the right through all of the columns, how do I find out the total payment on that bond? So we borrowed 4699, how much did we end up paying for that? How do I get to that?
To
How do I
date?
get to that variable?
So if the question is to date, before, at the end of fiscal '22, you'd take the 1.469 and you subtract the 1.150. That would have been the payment to date.
Okay,
We're planning on paying 100,000 principal and the associated interest, 209,000. I'm sorry, the 43,700. So those would be the debt service associated with that particular bond.
Any other questions? Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. Mr. Griffin, does it really matter, if we remember, infrastructure did vote to change the name of the Broad Street Parkway. A Rose by any other name is still a rose, but I don't know if that matters. But it is formally now known as Veterans Parkway,
Veterans Memorial Parkway.
Veterans Memorial Parkway. So when you say Broad Street Parkway, I think we all completely understand what you're talking about, but, you know.
Right, and furthermore, Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes.
may, when we got approval from bond council, it specifically talks about this name. So I can imagine other municipalities where they're changing names, you know, to Carl Yastrzemski Way or Jim Plunkett Way, or, only kidding, but dating myself, but we could put an AKA in here, I mean,
Duly noted.
but thank you.
Mr. Griffin, I noticed the high school's on this list. Are they paid off now?
So, great question. If we look at page 213, and we look at the refunding, we actually, Mr. Fredette, Treasurer Fredette refunded these bonds to get a lower interest rate. You see the refunding high school?
Mm-hmm.
So you see a $2.2 million principal payment on a $4 million for balance. So you've got a couple of, I would imagine that would be a 2-year payoff. So by '24, it should be paid off.
That's what I was thinking, was 24. So it dovetailed with the high school coming off and the new middle school going on. Alderman Lopez.
With regards to the 2015 radio communications bond, and my suspicion that that's coming back again with the new upgrades, can you roll an old bond, pay it off, and then into new ones? It looks like it's due 2023.
Mr. Griffin?
This schedule, Mr. Chairman, this schedule will prevail. I know that Mr. Mansfield was in front of you looking for radios. And if you look at, there's a few those of us that were here back then, there was, we needed to build the infrastructure at the police station, fire station. Then we needed the radios. I guess you're asking, should we pay that off?
There's one for 2013 that expires in 2023.
Yep. We're gonna buy, so, subject to our planning, we're gonna basically borrow that money in July or August of '23, and the first payments are gonna be in '24. So there shouldn't be 2 payments for radio, especially the radios that don't exist. But it all, as Mr. Mansfield indicated, radios are, got a lot going on, a lot of moving parts, a lot of technology, and the vendors are, captive. So it's like, you have to, you have to go with what they have to a degree.
So it's,
So- Go ahead.
it's gonna go away anyway because radio from 2013 is gonna be over when we start the new one.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Just to reiterate, when we pass a bond in this board, it doesn't get purchased right away. It only gets purchased when the city needs money to pay for what the bond was purposed, and the bond could be let, depending on the amount of it, over several years. So, any other questions?
Sullivan.
Thank you. In general, and I think maybe you've answered this question for me before. The city of our size, with our operating budget, taxes that we take in, what is considered healthy debt?
I think we did.
Mr. Chairman, I recall a 10% number, and I think we kind of talked about that on May 5th. We're under that,
Well,
but we're moving towards it
Okay.
with the investments we're making in the middle school projects, DPW building, Performing Arts Center, those types of projects.
Were you here the night we talked about the different percentages for bonding? What's allowed by the state? What we allow by ordinance here in the city, which is less?
Yes,
where
I
we're
just
at?
wasn't recalling it, so
Okay.
I just needed a refresher.
Thanks.
I appreciate it.
Alderman Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I might know the answer to this question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. I see here 2 bonds for Broad Street Parkway, now the Veterans Memorial Parkway.
Thank you.
One is, not labeled, the other one's labeled Series B. Is it my understanding that that's us going back out and getting more money for the same project and then just labeling it B?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the Broad Street Parkway took a number of years to build, and Treasurer Fredette, in the fashion that he liked to pursue selling bonds, broke it apart based on the needs. You can't sell too early, you have arbitrage problems, we talked about that, but you can't really you can't borrow money and make money off of it. So you want to time it properly. So that's why you're going to see 3 or 4 sales, I think, totaling it. I think it was 33 million we borrowed.
Mr. Chair, can I get a follow-up?
Follow-up?
Thank you. I see here there's a line item for Mine Falls Dam Series A taxable. What does that taxable designation mean? Because I figured all bonds we pay taxes on, but.
Mr. Chairman, most of the bonds we sell are non-taxable because they're for a public good. When we bought the Mine Falls Dam and we needed to bond that, there was a notion of us capturing the electricity and selling it. Not a notion, that's what we do, actually. We sell, and it's in the hydroelectric budget, but, so we needed to pay, we couldn't get bond counsel to give us a clean, hey, that's a non-taxable use of that bond. And we wanted to be conservative and sell it taxable, which at the time, it was good timing because the difference between a taxable bond and a non-taxable was close.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to contingency on page 214.
So, Mr. Chairman, contingency, Department 194, is made up of 3 items. General contingency is in case there was an unforeseen, unbudgeted expense, or something went up more than you thought of. So that's the 250,000 that we've been pretty consistent with. Since I've been here, we put this contingency for police grants, I think this might be the HOPWA, or some, not HOPWA, that's a public health, but it's a violence grant.
The AWA, Violence Against Women Act.
Violence, right, so we put this in here, and the city's match is the amount of the proposed appropriation. So we work very closely with Ms. Smith, Karen Smith, who's the business manager at the police department. And then finally, this is important, to the extent there are contracts that are not settled going into a particular fiscal year, we work with the departments that are responsible for the negotiations, and we put a number in this area to pay for the cost in fiscal '23 for that contract. It's interesting, I mean, it seems like an extra step, but it was thought that if you put it in the department, kept it there, we've done that from time to time, that the union kind of knows what the number is, but the reality is that, you know, there's a lot of knowledge out there on the part of both sides. So in this case, the contingency for, I believe it might be all school, that 548 going into next year.
Yeah, I think they got 2 unions still coming before us,
Yeah.
paras and secretaries.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, it could be another one in there too, but we know what the number is, and when you're asked to approve the contract, there's always in-related transfers. So we basically, that gives us the ability to move the money from this line item into the budget, into like a police department budget, into a school department budget. It's a little clunky when you look at some analysis, especially with the teachers. They were out most of the year, and then you look at the budgets and it looks like they're way down, but the money is in contingency for negotiation. So you gotta ask that, and we can get the numbers, or Mr. Donovan can get the numbers for you, but that's kind of how it's been done for years.
Bill and Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe in a previous meeting, we spoke about, I might botch the name, but money that was unallocated. We have an unallocated fund of money. What would be the difference between that particular monies and this contingency? Because from what I understand, you're saying if there's money that we overspend, we can pull from the contingency to pay for that. But we also have this other fund. Is there a specific difference? Could we use either or? Could you walk me through that?
Certainly. So the first line item you used the other day, there was an interest, a resolution that moved 25,000 from that line over to the, what's referred to the Elder Center. Whatever the name was of this, but the senior center. Former Alderman Karen was here. It was a great meeting, and you approved that. That's been done for several years, but that's the type of expenditure, not budgeted, but comes out of the general contingency. That's how that's used, mostly for unanticipated, unforecasted, something happened. The third one, that's basically money that was in a budget, police department, school department, fire department. It was moved here for the purposes of showing that it's a contingency for negotiation, and you can't use it for anything else.
Okay.
Couldn't. But that, and it's not, you're trying to do the best you can when you're forecasting, like a Mr. Donovan or a Smith, and you do the best you can. That's the only money that's moved there, is the money that's put in here. So to the extent it's less expensive or more expensive, they have to manage that.
Follow up?
So, I understand that, thank you. So, in a pinch, could we then, and this is more for my own edification, we could pull from that fund that has money that has been unallocated as well, if we needed to? There's no sort of stipulations or certain requirements on that monies.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I want to make sure you understand what I might have meant by, there's an unassigned fund balance.
Unassigned, thank you.
That's got 31.6 million in it. That's unassigned, meaning it's not earmarked for anything. But to the extent you want to use it, you need an appropriation.
Okay,
So sometimes over the next year or two, you're gonna see, we want to use money from assigned fund balance to shore something up, or unassigned. But we have assigned fund balance that we use to pay for that teacher contract, and then that was an effective use because it was a one-time payment. And the follow-on years, Mr. Donovan has budgeted accordingly. So there's unassigned, that's a real good value, 31.1 million that our rating agencies look at. sign of fiscal strength. And then the assigned is money that we've not spent through escrow, not done anything with, but we've assigned it for liabilities. And years ago, we thought we were gonna have a hell of a problem with pensions, which we did, but we got our way out of that. And then healthcare, we got our way out of that. Now it's, it could be another item at this point. Thank you.
And we have to approve those when they come forward from the mayor.
The unassigned ones.
The Board of Aldermen have
Right.
to approve. Alderman Wisher?
Yeah, I had a question about the Nashua Senior Center and why we don't just budget that line item. I mean, they come asking for it every year and we give it to them every year. Why should we take it out of contingency and why wouldn't we put it under community and civic activities as a line item?
It's a great idea.
Well,
When it came back again, I said the same thing. We, the accounting in us and the practicality of it, it was interesting because it would come every year. Like a surprise, when it's not. But you're right.
We have seniors.
Yeah, the snow, the seniors. But it could be done. We just have to plan for it. And it could be in the transfer section that I'm gonna get to in a minute.
Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. With that stated, Mr. Griffin, Mr. Chairman, I do have a couple of questions. But that stated, so one of us need to provide legislation then to make that happen, correct? Would be the procedure? In other words, to include the senior center on a line item, its own separate line item.
I think the quickest answer would be in that civic and community activities area where you budget. You just budget $25,000 to go to them.
Okay.
If you look at that civic and community activities grouping of expenditures, there's significant money going to nonprofits. And there's some monies that go through that CDBG process, so. But you wouldn't need to, I don't think you'd need to submit an
Okay,
ordinance.
I didn't know
that
if we
resolution for
need
yourself.
legislation to create it, but it sounds like Alderman Wiltshire, brilliant idea,
well, I don't know about that, but, I mean.
No, I'll give you the
makes
credit.
sense.
Good credit.
I do have another question, Mr. Chairman, if
Yes.
I may. Mr. Griffin, as you know, we are still suffering from COVID hangover, and what's going on. So can you just tell us, the general consistency is 250,000, and you say like in the past, we haven't really peaked on that, but Alderman Dowd and myself are both involved with building projects that are going on, and that doesn't work out of contingency, we understand that. But the point is, we are getting hit with unanticipated, what's happened with COVID and getting supplies and other things, and I'm sure that's gonna happen with the city. What we budgeted for, X amount of dollars, may, in the future, go up in the price. So do you feel that compared to past years, the 250 is adequate with the COVID hangover that's going on?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the 250 is adequate for this purpose. What we did do, as you folks recall, is we allowed the operating departments to carry over things that were normally operational costs for 2021, 2022. So one of our objectives is closing out this year is to work with the departments to see if they need what's referred to as the escrows. So we covered it that way instead of needing appropriation from you folks. So it was a pent-up demand for training, licenses and certification. Basically, the whole state was kind of shut down, so we allowed that. And before I came up here today, there's a sizable amount of escrows that I would recommend we don't re-escrow. And that's why when the mayor and I and others met with the departments, this budget should be the budget you need for fiscal '23. Because otherwise you get into on the accounting side, you're reaching back taking money from 2 years ago to pay for something you're doing this year, so that, and that's, but the answer to your question, Alderman O'Brien, is we covered it that way, because we didn't know what was gonna happen.
Right.
This 250 is for something that went up and you didn't expect it, or there was an expense that happened. And I think Alderman Wilshire is saying the 25,000 is like clockwork. I know Alderman Karen was very respectful and would say, work with Chairman, the Mayor, and Treasurer Fredette and say, is it not enough money in there for us? That type of thing. But if there is a need there, you want to fund things operationally and not have to go through an extra step to get the right money to the right spot. Thank you.
Any other questions on contingency? All right, we're gonna move on to interfund transfers, page 215.
So this is an area where, by your approval of this budget, you are allowing the Financial Services Division to make these transfers. Let me skip over the first one, solid waste, and I'll get into that in a second. But you have the 14 Court Street. The City Retirement Expendable Trust Fund, let me explain that. Historically, we put 500,000 in, and the reason for that is it's worked effectively in the past. It's to avoid the need for departments, city departments, DPW, police, fire, financial services, administrative. It avoids us from having to identify a retirement and fund it. Now, what this is the final payment. This is the vacation that wasn't taken and the sick time according to the sick time rules of payout. So my second year here, I was horrified. This number was 1.9 million. I think there was a run, I think you might remember. A lot of police, a lot of fire left, probably because of the changes that were made in 2011. But the 500,000,
Yeah.
500,000 is the amount we keep. But from time to time, we ask the Board of Aldermen, and we might have to do it this year, to move money from an assigned fund balance for future liabilities to this, to shore it up, because this is the way, this has to be funded to get the money to the division in which the person retired. So that's a sizable amount, but a very important amount.
Alderman Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I understand it, instead of the department tracking down or keeping track of or having to pull this money out of their operational budget for, paying off vacation time or sick time, they just come to the budget and say, we need X amount of dollars to cover so-and-so's retirement, rather than, running around trying to figure out where the money's gonna come from out of their budget.
So mechanically, how that works is, person retires, final payment. That communication comes from payroll to financial services. And financial services moves the money from city retirement ETF into the department. And you folks actually get communication monthly. The fund this 500,000 this year was spent by January. So what we're trying to do now is, the people at the divisions that had retirements, can they fund it themselves? And the answer is no. But that's on the city side. School side, as we know, they could have a situation where things change contractually, NHRs related, and not the typical 30 teachers retire, but 100 of them retire. That's a problem, because the school department funds their retirement. So what they've done, a smart thing, is they request, to the best extent possible, the teachers to notify them by February, the date in February, if they're gonna retire, because there's a liability that they have to pay out. So the school department has a similar challenge, and sometimes COO Donovan is able to fund that with attrition. They might have 50 to 100 open spaces, and they have the budget for it, they pay that. But it's always a work in progress with them, and we work closely together.
Alderman Kathy? Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see here that there's a trust fund for the police overtime. I'm wondering why we have that rather than the overtime being in their operational budget?
I think I can address that. They have that fund because they never know when there's gonna be a major crime, a killing, a shooting, and requires a significant amount of overtime with detectives and things. And this account had money in it, and they've had a couple of major crimes that they had a lot of investigating, a lot of expense. So this is replenishing it into that account, so they'll have that if there's, from what I've seen with the reports lately, it probably is going to be needed.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did not see a transfer into the SERF, the Capital Equipment Reserve Fund. Is that something that we should be doing annually?
Mr. Griffin?
Good question. We used to fund SERF, used to put funds in, and we found that good, bad, or indifferent, it might be used for some other expenses. So what we do, we decided to not fund it and use the escrow process to replenish it. So what's needed, I mean, if you recall, we need about 2.2 million of cash. The fund, you're gonna see on, if you look at, you're gonna see like 4 million something, you say, wow, that's good. But as I mentioned, once you approve the purchase of the vehicle, they don't have to buy it that year if there's supply chain issues, et cetera. So it's earmarked. So with the 3 million we put in through escrow last year, we've got about $1.5 million that I think is gonna remain, so we're chasing the difference between the 2.1 and the 1.5. So it's,
Okay.
yeah, it's, sometimes we've put in $1.7 million, sometimes we put in nothing. It's, but at the end of the day, when Alderman Cat, when you folks see these multitude of spreadsheets put together, you'll see, wow, there's a lot of needs. What Alderman Dowd's saying is, when the mayor and I and others not really negotiate, we just say, can you live without this when we're here? All we do is just move it to the right, and the number's like 5 million. We know it's not gonna be 5 million, it's gonna be something less, but you keep moving things out. And, we wanna have vehicles that operate as efficiently and effectively as possible. And when I got here, the refuse trucks look like the non-city refuse trucks, fenders falling off, it was bad. But the city made a great investment in these assets and will continue to do so, but they're expensive and they're bonded. We talk about the fire trucks being bonded. You need to bond a $650,000 refuse truck, CNG powered.
Just like the refuge equipment at the landfill, but we've had some things in the past, when the repair expenses outweigh the cost of buying a new one, that's when you have to buy a new one. Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry, Alderman Jettie, do you have a question?
I do, but is it my turn?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I noticed that we have transfer to downtown improvements. We transferred 100,000 last year. I kind of remember Alderman Clemmons making the motion to do that in view of the fact that the money from the parking in meters, I think it is, was less than anticipated. And in order to support the Downtown Improvements Committee, he made a motion and we passed a resolution to give them a $100,000. I thought that was a one-time payment, but I see
Yeah, so,
you've got another 100,000 scheduled for next year.
right.
I don't remember how we're
So,
voting on that.
yep, no, your memory is accurate. Matter of fact, I was searching high and low for what I thought was a resolution, but it's an ordinance. Deputy Corporation Counsel Clark helped me, Dory Clark, very helpful. So you're absolutely correct. So when I got to there, I was gonna say, I was not thinking properly. It is a one-time. Matter of fact, I listened intently to your meeting on Tuesday, and Chairman Dowd properly said this is a one-time thing. So I put this in inadvertently. But what I did do is I reached out, I haven't heard back, but I reached out to Alderman Clemmons. I don't know if he's coming back in or not. What I did tell him, it has a $247,000 balance in it, so he might be okay. Back when he made that proposal, that piece of legislation last January, we didn't know what was gonna happen with the pandemic. We're not bad as Economic Development Director Cummings said the other night, he's optimistic, but you got a bunch of things happening simultaneously with the studies and everything, but it's definitely unlikely, well, it didn't happen this year. The money's collected for parking, it's the entire amount. Did not come close to $728,000, which is the threshold. As Director Cummings said, usually it's $828 to $900, and that money goes in. That's not gonna happen. Not sure, but he's optimistic that it will happen next year, and it will revert, the way the ordinance reads, it reverts back to the normal calculation. But you're absolutely correct. So that number could be zeroed
Okay,
or
thank,
used for some other purpose, but
All
you're
set,
absolutely
Alderman
correct.
Jay?
yes, thank you.
Alderman Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To piggyback off of Alderman Sullivan's question, if we're funding the SURF or approving the SURF, how can that money then be used for something else, one? And two, how do we make sure that that money does not get used for something else? If I want to buy, or if I want the city to buy, 10 police cars and fire trucks and, all the other things, how do we ensure that that money is used for those vehicle purchases rather than something else, and then those cars don't get funded?
Mr. Griffin?
So, you're approving the slate of purchases for fiscal '23. That money is in there. We can't use it for anything else.
Oh, okay. So now once that list is approved, they're gonna go buy those trucks or cars or whatever for those amounts on that list, period.
Well, they're hoping to buy it for less than those amounts, but it might be more, and I explained the process if
Right.
it is more. But those are locked in. It can't be used for any other
Okay.
reason. And what's happening with the supply chain and vehicle purchase, it's backed up. There's fiscal '21 vehicles that haven't been bought yet, fiscal '22, fiscal '23. So, but we know what's funded. So when you take a look at the spreadsheet, you'll see, okay, these are committed. And as I mentioned, if all you're doing is moving things to the right in one column, the number's gonna be big. It's gonna be like 5 million. There's no way we're gonna buy them all. So you take something that was gonna be replaced in '24 and you move it out, you don't, right? Or you can decide not to buy it. Fire department, for example, a couple of years ago said, we're gonna get rid of 3 vehicles and buy 1. Because it had all the things you needed for the 3 vehicles. So there is some creativity involved as well.
Thank you.
Oh, 2 things. One, they just don't go out and buy every other thing on the list in one day. And when they do buy something, well, usually police buy their things all in one shot. All those have to go through finance committee and get the contracts approved.
So we're just approving, in theory, the amount and saying that's good.
Basically like putting the money aside in the budget, so when it goes to finance and they say, yeah, you can buy it, you know where the money's coming from.
Right, okay. Thank you.
All right, no other questions? And we will move on to, Special Road and Highway Fund on page 240, 250.
So, Mr. Chairman, this was created several years ago. The funding sources for paying the debt service are motor vehicle permit fees. And as you can see, we're gonna put $1.1 million in fiscal '23 in there. And we do get state revenue that's titled a highway block grant. And it typically runs around $1.5 million, depending upon the funding up at the state level. And the use of fund balance in this case is in order to pay the debt service below, we need to use some of the money that we collected in prior years. So this particular special road and highway fund funds the debt service associated with the paving program.
Questions? Alderman Kathy?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so I'm clear, the motor vehicle permit fees, those are the same, I see the account number is the same, that are listed in the general fund estimated revenue. So we're taking 1.1 out of that 11, 12, 13, whatever it's going to be this year, and putting it towards this account here.
Right, to this fund, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
And then on the detail page, you see the sales that Treasurer for Debt made for the first 4 years of the bond. And we plan to do the 5th year of that first 5-year program.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to Penachuk Acquisition Bond Fund, page 251, 252.
So we set this account up, Mr. Chairman. Penachuk timely and accurately provides us with the contributions annually. And it's designed to pay the principal and interest on the city's bonds that it sold to acquire Penachuk. And back in 2011-12, when I looked at a 30-year bond schedule, I'm like, wow, it's gonna be interesting. I wonder what I'll be doing 30 years from 2012, but it's worked great. They pay timely.
And it's a higher interest rate because it's a taxable bond.
Right.
I knew you were gonna ask that question.
I was gonna ask why we didn't rebond or refund into a lower rate, because the rates were great this past
Yeah, no,
couple years. Okay.
we would
So
if we could.
there was no way that rate was gonna come down? Okay.
I've talked to Treasurer for that, or former Treasurer for that,
Right.
a couple times about that. Any other questions? No? All right, we'll move on to City Special Revenue Funds by grants on page 257.
So we have grants, Mr. Chairman, as you know, we have several grant opportunities, being a city of our size and demographics. So this is a listing of, it's an estimate. We're fortunate we get grants that we don't even think exist today, but they might exist tomorrow. But to basically explain to you folks what we're doing here is, both Comptroller Evans and I understand what a grant is and understand that you need to accept, this body needs to accept and appropriate grants. Can't spend public money, whether it's through taxation or grants, without an appropriation. So we wanted to include these grants in this budget. One of the speakers before doesn't like it, but when I read the spending cap language that's in the charter, I don't see an exclusion of grants that are appropriated by this board. So erring on the side of caution, we wanted to include it. And as you recall, we included about 77 million last year. So as Chairman Dowd indicated, in the legislation, I recommended two and got approval to include the charter language, so you didn't have to go searching for it, and the calculation of the spending cap. So it was with clear mind and conscience that Comptroller Evans and me as the CFO put together that schedule. There can be debates about, you know, this, that, and the other thing, but my review of the spending cap that I came in with in 2010, it was a charter that was amended by ordinance. Complicated. So I leave you with that, just to kind of, you know, balance the ledger, so to speak, but we are including all appropriations in our analysis. So that's, you know, there's other details, more legal stuff that probably needs to be hashed out, but that, I wanted to share with you why this is in this budget. So we've captured special revenue funds, grants that are appropriations, and we've got wastewater, solid waste appropriations, we've got general fund appropriations to sum up to what we're indicating in the budget. And that's in the resolution. That's why all things total, and then we are obligated to send that up to the Department of Revenue before we can begin the tax calculation in the fall.
All these divisions rely heavily, especially the police department, on these grants, so they would be in trouble. Alderman Kathy?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Question for you. Has this body ever said no to accepting a grant? In your,
Not that I recall, but if there were contingencies in the grant that would cause us issues, we probably would.
okay. I was just curious about that, because from my experience, we just usually accept them.
Most of them are pretty favorable to the city, though.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That's Alderman O'Brien?
yeah, and to extenuate that a little bit, grants come with a very guardrails to
Mhm.
it. You can't go beyond, and if you do, you can penalize yourself for receiving future requests for grants.
Mm.
So everybody pretty much follows the grants right down the straight and narrow. Yet it's something that most people seek, you know, because if the feds are putting out, let's say, more money to help out with hazmat, then the fire department would naturally, oh, we have a hazmat team. Why fund it out of the taxpayers' dollars? Because the taxpayers have paid in federal tax dollars, so it behooves to get that particular grant.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the people that seek these grants, 'cause they don't just fall in our lap usually, people that are seeking these grants, we met the grant writer that we share with the school department. They know what these grants are all about and what the details are and the requirements. Any other question on grants? Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the, there was the calculation that I'm looking at now with the spending cap. And the grants, according to this, it's on line number 4, you included in the special revenue funds, in parentheses, includes the grant. So part of that 59,581,000, that's where the grants sit. No, it's not in the general fund, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
So that line includes the special revenue funds for city, special revenue funds for school. The big one there is, as you know, Mr. Donovan came in and talked about the food service. That's a large federal grant. So it's all of that together that if according to plan, you would be appropriating 406,663,584.
Any other questions on grants? Any last minute questions for Mr. Griffin before we send him home for the evening? Seeing none, Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to table R-22-035, which is relative to the adoption of the fiscal year 2023 proposed budget for the city of Nashua General Enterprise, Special Revenue, and Grant Funds.
Motion is to table R-22-035. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. It's on the table. It's not on the agenda, but public comment. Name and address for the record.
Lori Ortolano, 41 Berkeley Street. Just to let you know, it was at the March 21st meeting that Alderman Jettie said, so I don't know where we stand on spending or the cap. I know there's been a provision in this spending cap for accepting certain things. So I was wondering if it would be possible for you to arrange for Corporation Counsel and maybe CFO to kind of give us a little lesson on what we're dealing with. Are we constrained by the spending cap, and if so, what is it? And your response was, I will talk, Chairman Dowd, to Mr. Griffin about it when we know that, and it would be the mayor, Mr. Griffin, and legal. I wouldn't touch it myself. Okay, no problem. Then you went on the 28th and you addressed it again when Alderman Jettie said, so I know at the last meeting I expressed my confusion. You said we have a special meeting on that and it hasn't been set up yet. Alderman Jettie said, okay, we're getting our budgets around May 10th. So sometime in April we'll discuss it, and you said that's the plan. Now, the fact, don't interrupt my time. The fact that that was what you were doing, and then you come here today when I try to ask and I email you about this and say you had a private meeting with somebody and determined that there's nothing to discuss is just wrong. I think we're entitled to have that discussion, and CFO Griffin touched on that. Fred T. Boone mentioned that we haven't done that with the money for 25 years. I don't know if that's true or not. I honestly don't know. I haven't been here. But I want to hear that debate. And I think he's right when he says grants are not under the control of the local departments. They're under the control of the federal government or the state agency that gave you the grant. That is not local controlled money. And I think there's a point to be made there. So I'd like to understand why we switched that. Other people have spending tax caps, and do they fold their grant money in? That might be interesting to know. I don't know the answer to that. The other thing I want to tell you is winter is coming, people, in these tax assessments that are coming out. And I went to the Board of Assessors meeting, and I was disgusted by the presentation from Vision today. They had clearly been told by the mayor to not provide information and clamp down. 2 months ago, they gave a very detailed presentation on where they stood with increases. Today, they come in, pretty much say nothing. And Ms. Kleiner says, we don't want to say the wrong thing. We don't want to give out information that's overly broad. Well, the mayor spoke freely about it on May 15th. He dropped all kinds of breadcrumbs. So I expected to go in there and get information. You people have no idea what is coming down here. You better get serious about cutting this budget. You have no idea. It's entirely wrong. And did anyone know we have no certified assessing supervisor in assessing? Were you told that? I just learned that today. That's a huge problem. They can't do abatements down there. Did she and anyone disclose to you that that is the condition of the office?
Time.
Okay, general discussion? Seeing none? Oh, Alderman O'Brien?
Yeah, I just want the public to realize when we talk about the spending cap, and CFO Griffin alluded a little bit to it, you got to remember we had a spending cap, and then we found out we had several questions. And what was originally brought up, for those that remember 25 years ago, perhaps I'm not going to ask anybody on the board to date themselves, but but being on the fire department at the time, we took keen interest in it because it did hurt the city and did hurt things like surf. Many of the questions that did come up and many of the things that we discussed this evening were hangovers from the spending cap. But the thing is, the spending cap was found to be illegal because there was no override to it. I think every alderman in this room realized there was no public outswell by the citizens of Nashua to bring back the spending cap. But yet one particular citizen with one particular senator asked the good people within file legislation up at the State House. So our city charter was at the whim and discussed by 400 state legislators and all of the Senate. So that meant the good people of Hart's location, Jackson, Milan, Berlin, had direct say into the city of Nashua, our sovereignty on how to affect the spending cap. I don't know about you, but as a citizen of Nashua, I am kind of aggrieved to that, because I think we are smart enough to run ourselves, whether we pick and choose. The right way would have been to do it, was to do what originally Mr. T. Boone did, was go out and get the signatures and to bring back and have the spending cap brought up and let it be vetted by the voters. But he let the back door of the hen house open. And it came in the back way, and it's to be duly noted. And if this is something that's gotta create problems, as it has in the 25 years we had it, I mean, go figure. Do you think we ignored paving the roads for 25 years? We didn't ignore them. There wasn't the money available to do it because of things like the spending cap. And yet we heard that we're 10% is a healthy city, yet we're under that. And yet we don't have a spending cap. So what's the gripe? Thank you.
Alderman Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Long before I became an alderman, I was quite interested in the spending cap, only because I enjoy financial matters and city government issues. And it's hard for me to approve a budget or vote on a budget or talk about a budget when I don't have all the parameters. The city is asking me to represent them well and to be an honorable representative to approve a budget, but I don't know all the details. And the spending cap is one of those details. Now, we could sit here and talk about illegal, legal, voting, this, that, and everything, but at the end of the day, it's a piece of the puzzle that I think that at least I would need to understand in some detail, maybe not every detail, because it sounds like a very complex issue. I've tried to do a little bit of reading on it. It's deep, but I would prefer if we could have some presentation, something that I can sink my teeth into where I understand what I'm dealing with, because I am flat out uncomfortable voting on anything where I don't have all of the information that I need to have to vote on whatever that is. Regardless of whatever all the details are, I need to have that information, because it's valuable to make good decisions. It won't necessarily change my decision, but I need to have all the information. So if we could work out something where we could get a spending cap presentation, it doesn't have to be PhD level, but that would be, I think, advantageous to at least me and maybe other aldermen as well, to understand to some detail what is going on, and then might even benefit us talking to our constituents who may have questions. If we don't understand it, then it's going to be hard for us to talk to them about it as well. So if we could work that out, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
I've been advised that in order for us to have that discussion, that we would need the mayor of the corporation council, Mr. Griffin, and the only meeting we're gonna have with those people all in present as far as the budget is the public hearing.
Could we add
don't
it?
have any other nights available.
Can we add it as an agenda item on one of our budget meetings? Or to the public hearing, is that
If we
possible?
don't have those people present, the answer would be no, so.
Could we invite them?
I think that they have made the determination on what the tax cap is, and it's in their ballpark. It's not in our ballpark to change that. So, and that's why they put the definition in the legislation itself, and they stand by it. If you'd like to talk to the mayor separately about it, I would suggest you do that.
Okay.
Alderman Kelly?
I have to agree with Alderman Kathy. I think that whatever happened at the State House, we need to know what is being interpreted at this moment, and we need to have a discussion about it. So I think that the 5 people you just listed need to avail themselves to be at the first budget wrap-up and tell us what it means for what we vote on this, because I agree, I'm not gonna vote on a budget if I don't know what the legal parameters are.
So I can talk to the mayor, but, you know, they're the people who made the determination, not anybody in this room.
I don't think it's about determination, it's just making sure that we understand what this new piece of legislation means in terms of what we can say is right or not right this year. Because we've never, I mean, I've been on the board for only 5 years now, but we've never had to deal with that, and I want to make sure that we know what we're doing.
Alderman Wiltshire?
I agree. Plain and simple, I agree. We need the information, everybody here needs the information, so we should make it happen.
So, I'm not sure if the mayor is back, but we'll talk to the mayor about, because we would need the mayor and corporation council who made some of the rulings on the cap, and Mr. Griffin. So, but a lot of our meetings that are left now are major divisions, so, those are already gonna be long meetings, but, I think it's gonna be fully explained at the public hearing, and if it's not, we can do it at one of the wrap-up meetings. We have wrap-up meetings after the public hearing to make motions and any last-minute things on the budget. I don't know if we can fit it in ahead of time, but I'll talk to the mayor and see what they can do. I don't think he's back yet, is he?
No, he's still going.
I think he's not
not
back
back
till
this
next
week,
week. So, any other? Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. I agree. The other piece that I really, and I'm just gonna bring it home because most people got their first tax bill of this year last week. And I'm really concerned about what was brought up in public comment as well about the other part, what that tax bill in December is gonna look like. And I know that I mentioned it at our very first budget meeting. And I just feel like it's a great unknown. And if we approve this budget, knowing what could happen with these assessments, knowing that residents are gonna be, from what I understand, on the hook for more for that general fund because of the assessment of the commercial tax rate, then that could be devastating in a very devastating year so far for people that are spending $100 to fill up their gas tank, to spend more money for food, to do these other things. That is what is on my mind every single meeting. What is that December tax bill gonna look like if I say yes to this budget? And that, to me, is the essence of what we're doing. So I know I ask a lot of questions that are really, tactical and specific, but that's the number that I'm trying to get to. And I feel, as a new alderman, very uncomfortable saying yes to a budget that I don't know how it's going to impact my constituents. Period. The end.
Alderman Kelly?
Yes, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a memo from Director Cummings about potentially using ARPA funds. We had talked about them in other scenarios, but I thought that he was insinuating that we potentially use it for paying down the tax rate this year. Maybe I misunderstood, but I kind of wanted to ask if that was the case, and if so, can he clarify what he was thinking with that?
I'm not sure I followed it. What's the question?
It was in the last packet. He sent a memo around the ARPA funds, and it sounded like he had changed his suggestion to using it towards paying down the tax rate, because that was one of the options when we originally talked
Mr.
about it.
Griffin, do you have any?
CFO, Treasurer, Tax Collector Griffin, you're absolutely correct, Mr. Economic Development Director Cummings submitted a communication to the Board of Aldermen. It's been referred to the Human Affairs Committee. It doesn't have funds being used for reducing taxes.
Okay.
The majority of the funds is more trying to address housing-related matters. And then there's other items, not to overcomplicate things, but because we're using a U.S. Treasury revenue replacement model, we have a little bit more latitude than trying to tie everything back to COVID. But the initial US Treasury guidelines where you couldn't just take the money and pay down the tax rate. We could further explore that, but that communication, Director Cummings and I collaborated on that, and he presented it to you. So I'm assuming that I think on June 13th, you're gonna be, going over that in the Human Affairs Committee.
The one thing is that the reason we don't do motions until the wrap-up sessions is because you don't know where we're at with the budget until you've talked to all the divisions and that you know what their essential needs are for their division. And then, if there are areas that you feel the city can live without, then you can make motions at the wrap-up session to reduce that. But from the number of years I've been doing this, to get a major reduction in the budget, you're gonna fire people because we're predominantly people-oriented. 85% of the school budget, I think, is people, teachers, parents, So last year, we had a question about the fire department. They would have had to close a station, get rid of a fire company because you can't just reduce 2 people. There's 4 people on a truck, around the clock. So listen to all the departments and all the divisions, and then if you feel there are areas where it can be impacted, then you can make motions at the wrap-up session. Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you. And I understand what you're saying, and I also, with all due respect to Alderman O'Brien, and I hear about we need our roads paved and our firemen paid and our teachers paid. I understand all of that, I get that. But I also think of Mr. and Mrs. Smith on 123 Main Street that can't pay their taxes because the tax bill is too high. I think of that also. And that, I think of all of it. And we have a tremendous responsibility here. And I want to make sure that we can do everything that we can do as a city, but to be as responsible as possible. But I just, again, going back to my comment, is if I walk into these wrap-up sessions not knowing what, in a gross estimation, what that tax rate's gonna be, or the assessment, or whatever number we have to figure out, it's gonna be hard for me to make a motion, because I'm really just throwing darts, hoping to hit a target.
I think usually by the wrap-up sessions, we have some general idea of what we're talking about for tax rate, but there are also parts of spending that wasn't done this year that we alluded to earlier, that the mayor can put against the tax rate to keep the tax increase down. I doubt you get it to 0, but it's gonna have to be some level, and because you're not only fighting, I understand the reason people are having problem paying bills and everything, but that same economic driver that's costing them money is costing all of the city departments money. And you have to make a decision when we get to that point, do we have enough funding to, because we'll be hopefully getting the $2 million from the state, and that's a point on the tax rate. If we can keep the tax increase moderate, as you suggest, then we'll do it. There are other ways to do it. There are many ways to do it. And at the end, we always put money towards the tax rate, as was alluded to earlier this evening. So we don't know how much that's going to be. But we'll know by the time we get there, hopefully, we'll know by the time we get to the wrap-up. Alderman Kathy? Oh, I'm sorry, I had Alderman Brian.
Well, it's just to Alderman Sullivan, I understand the all due respect, and I agree with you. I am too concerned about Mr. and Mrs. Smith down on Main Street. But I'm also very concerned about Mr. and Mrs. O'Brien on Whitfield Street, me. And what the public ought to realize, and I think the board realizes, what we do here in this chamber affects us too. We don't get no benefit, baby, by being on the Board of Aldermen. We get like a stipend for our time and everything, but we get no reduction in taxes or anything else like that, you know? So, you know, believe me, charity begins at home and all those other additives. And I too share your concerns, because everything, or my decision affects moi as well as anybody else. But the phenoms, you gotta keep in mind, we just went through a revaluation of real estate, and I didn't raise the property value of the houses that are different than, 5 years ago. There's people house poor. They're sitting on a gold mine, and they're getting taxed because of what the fair market value for the property is. I didn't cause that. And it is unfair. You duly noted. And I'm sympathetic to that. And I don't want these people to sell and move out or move on. But, we gotta deal with these little phenoms that are out there equally as well. And yet, Lawrence didn't just happen overnight. You gotta ask yourself that question. How does a community die? And you gotta keep the city from not dying. And again, I look at it that my job here as an alderman is only to be a custodian, to pass it on to the future alderman. That will take my place, because I'm not here meant to be here forever. And yet, have something that's gotta be a quality life experience for a family to thrive in this community. And we're maintaining that, and I think we're doing fairly well. And I share the concerns. But when it comes down to it, unfortunately, it does, even St. Mark was a tax collector. Yet he was accepted. So it's tough. It's tough, but duly noted. I agree with you.
Alderman Kelly?
I went through 214 pages of our 227 last budget, so I could clarify what my question was. I think I made the leap here, but what I found in his memo to us, and I remember talking about housing, talking about other things, is that based on, this is what it says in quote, based on the advice of our consultant, it is the recommendation that the city use revenue replacement for the ARPA funds. So I think I then extrapolated that to, okay, we're replacing revenue that was spent because of COVID. There'll be less in the budget. Can you just explain a little more and make sure, I think it's a little muddy.
Mr. Griffin?
Certainly, I think it's an important precursor to Mr. Cummings, Director Cummings' presentation before the Human Affairs Committee. But the U.S. Treasury put out, typically what happens is the money gets appropriated and then the details get sorted out. So if you're the U.S. Treasury, you get this nice package of multi-millions, trillions of dollars that's going out to cities and towns. And then the U.S. Treasury is responsible for the rules of the road. And they originally came out with a multiplier of 4.2% on a calculation that I did. And we got, we tax, our increase in taxes is around 3% historically. So if you give me 4.2, you're gonna have a lot of calculated lost revenue, even though we didn't have lost revenue, right? Then they come out, they get all kinds of comments. A lot of consultants making a lot of money. They increased that 4.2 to 5.1. So the rules of the road are you could just take 10 million and use that as your quasi revenue replacement. There's not as many strings attached. It's federal money, so there's strings, but I didn't take that route. I took the calculated route, and within a couple of years, we're gonna have more than the 16 million we're getting in a calculated lost revenue. That frees up in large measure the way you can use the funds. If we didn't have that lost revenue, we'd have to tie things to COVID, like, how did you help somebody to get over this? How'd you do that? So they relaxed the requirements, and what I understand what you're saying. We can use it as revenue replacement, we're gonna buy down the tax rate, and that, no, we're gonna use revenue replacement as, let's say the numbers over the 4-year period, 30 million, where you don't have any requirement to spend it on something that you can make the compelling case that it's COVID related. So it's probably it's probably one of those US Treasury, like revenue replacement, it's not gonna help you tax. Matter of fact, the beginning rules where you can't take the money, put it in a pension plan, buy down the taxes, they wanted to help people. And the question I think we all ask is, if you take the entire 16 million and buy down the tax rate, what are you gonna do next year? That's what we're worried
And that
about,
was my
right?
worry, yeah.
That's why I say the 4 million is pretty consistent. You're not, if you budget the 15 million of motor vehicle, you guys might spend it all. You know, you might fund some great projects, and then you get nothing for surplus on the revenue side. So then everything's on the, you know what I mean? I'm not saying you do that, but that's kind of what I hear when I've been in municipal government from my hometown. They're like, no, we don't want to. In Massachusetts, you don't have to budget for snow and ice. Just add it to the next year's levy. Here, you actually do a nice job and actually budget for what you think it's gonna cost. But yeah, to just, so it become clear in that meeting that
Thank you.
Director Cummings is gonna say, 10 million for a housing initiative, 500,000 for backup servers, 600,000. Alderman Jay and I listened to the compelling case that the police made, that like, we need to get our act together with communications. You don't have that hurdle. You can nexus it with the pandemics because you need communications, you need fire, there's a fire thing in there, there's backup servers so you can actually operate in a pandemic. But yeah, and that, the lion's share is this, like I said, that housing thing.
Thank you very much. I
You're welcome.
appreciate it.
I'm glad I stayed. Because you need
Make
this
it a word for
information.
tonight.
I understand that. I just wanted to piggyback off of Alderman Sullivan's comments, and that I wholeheartedly agree. Believe I recall in our bonding conversation when you were here, I believe that was the same meeting that the mayor was in, that he said that you were usually pretty smart at being able to estimate what you think the tax rate would be. Obviously, it's gonna be a general estimate, it's not gonna be right on the money 100%. But I would look forward to hearing what you think the tax rate would be whenever you think that calculation is gonna come out, because I also agree that if I'm an adult and if someone's trying to sell me something and I'm gonna buy it, my first question is, well, how much does it cost and what are the benefits? The citizens are buying in their taxes the services of the city that they live in. I need to be able to tell them that the taxes that they are being charged are a good value. So if I approve a budget and then their tax rate comes out and it's way up, they could easily come back and say, the value that I'm getting out of this budget that you raised is not worth what the taxes I'm paying. I'd rather get less and pay less because this year is tough because of inflation, because of a lot of things. And so I think it would behoove me to know all that information and say, okay, yes, your taxes went up a little bit, but this is what you're getting, or this is what you're getting, and we're keeping the tax rate conservative. So I hope that before we sign off on the full budget that we would be able to at least have some idea. I mean, generally, get me somewhere close to that number. Doesn't have to be right on, so I can at least have some sort of intelligent conversation about what that looks like.
I think we always have a general idea.
So I'm glad I stayed because I get the opportunity to reach back in my career where I was the rate vice president for a natural gas company similar to Energy North, who's Colonial Gas Company. Similar issues. We're going for a rate increase. The last thing you want to do is mislead your customers, your taxpayers, your residents, and it's incredibly damaging. And we talk about this, the mayor and I and his client, Director Kleiner. So we had rate increases, gas company, Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, and they got smart. They're like, so in our communications, it'll be for customers that use 20 therms to 50 therms, your increase is gonna be between X and Y. prior to that, we'd say the average increase is gonna be 20%, let's say, right? No one's average. We have a dilemma here, quite frankly, but the good news is there's value. I was around, I think it was 88, bought, happy, thrilled, I bought a house, and 2 years later, it's worth a fraction of what 90%, but. So, when I came here, and talked to Treasurer Fredette, I said, you guys, there's no rate shock model here, there's no tax shock. It is what it is. In DPW land and PUC land and all that, they have this rate shock concept, that don't get it all back at once. So what New Hampshire has done is, every 5 years, you gotta do a revaluation, whether you like it or not. It just so happens that we came off of 2 recessions. We had the 08, I show up in 10, we did one in 13, everybody's happy, right? The rates actually went down. The budgets went up. But you're asking for just remember that fact, no one is average. Now, here's how it can be done. I mean, you basically take, and people are saying, what the mayor said or whatever, you gotta find a way you fit in that. And that's why you're doing the revaluation. So I was watching the same meeting that Sotolano went to. They go, on or around the 17th of August, you're gonna get a notice saying this is what your value is. And then you're gonna have the opportunity to meet informally with Vision, who are the experts in that area, certified. And they're gonna tell you. So you have the ability, and you had it in 2018, you can talk to somebody about your value, right? But what we're trying to do is, okay, what's the shift from commercial to residential? And what's your specific value increase? Everybody's saying, the 220 is now gonna go up to 300, what does that mean? So the rate could come down, but your value went up more than the rate is gonna help you coming down. That's the dilemma, and no one's average. You know what I mean? So I'm hoping, but on the utility side, they have these moderating things they can do. Payment plans, rate shock, deferred income on the part of the utility, those types of things. We don't have that here.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I'll make it a little more specific and pointed. In 2017, the year that I moved here and got married, my taxes went up $1,000 because of the reevaluation. That's a lot of money. Now, God had blessed my wife and I, and we were able to stymie that and afford that. There are families here that cannot afford something like that. That's a big jump. And even if it's half of that, given this year, they cannot afford that. Now, if I had known 6 months, 8 months, 10 months prior, I could have socked away $50 a week, $50, whatever it was, to get to that number. And so what we're trying to do is get us somewhere close so we can tell our constituents, start putting money away because the rates are going up. They just are. And I understand taxes always go up, but we have to come up with some way of mitigating that so they're not hit as hard, because I can imagine some of these families getting hit $300, $400, $500, $1,000 on their taxes. That's gonna be a big deal, especially given this year. And so what I'm trying to do is see if we can come up with some way of, like I said, getting somewhere close. I don't wanna make promises, but if I can say, hey, your taxes are gonna go up somewhere between $300 and $700, okay, they can then decide what they wanna put away or what they wanna do. But I can't walk away from the table saying, I don't know. And I think that I would like to figure out how we get to knowing. Thank you.
All set?
Yeah.
All right. Alderman O'Brien?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to just briefly have a personal privilege, if I may, could be under remarks of Alderman. We all received an email today of the untimely passing of Dick Gagnon. Dick Gagnon, for those who don't know, here we are in front of the camera, but Dick Gagnon was one of our producers on the Access Television Network. And so the good folks at home to listen to this discussion, he was one of the ones that made that all happen. So I'm sure from this board, it is timely, but express our sympathies and our condolences to the Gagnon family at this very difficult time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I may be recognized again for a motion.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make the motion to adjourn.
Motion is to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned at 10:04.